Good. You got the hot wings out of your mouth, or
Yes, I have recovered from the hot wings that I ate earlier. They were very
excellent.
spicy. I just slathered that shit all over the place. But I'm
You,
alive.
I was a little. I'm not gonna lie. I felt like it was a red flag that you don't drink milk at all, like no form of milk, like coconut milk even, or
No, well, I'm lactose intolerant and coconuts are fucking disgusting. Um
what about lactose-free milk, like Nutrell?
I could get that, but I always forget to. The only milk that I have in the house is for the coffee that I make, and it's in such small quantities that, it doesn't cause any issues.
Hey, fair enough. Well, I'm glad to report. I think we have pretty much matching water bottles. I know that you're quite well known for your massive water
Oh,
bottle.
fuck yeah.
So,
Based and hydration pilled. M
mhm,
People don't understand, there are actually no socioeconomic problems on Earth right now. People just don't get hydrated enough. All the people
that's
killing
true.
themselves in the white suburbs, they just had
Yeah, if they
water.
could just water and just, stop looking at blue screens, most problems would be solved.
But with enough water, you can spend more time looking at the blue screen.
Okay, yeah, the water like offsets it.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It sort of
Amazing.
absorbs and then allows the removal of the extra blue juice that gets into you from looking at the screen.
That's pretty powerful stuff. I'm gonna play a bit with my exposure.
I made this
That,
coffee perfectly.
what kind of coffee? It's very. Is it caffeinated?
Absolutely.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
And by made it, what I mean is I got the ratio of milk and cream to the coffee right, because of course it's one of those Keurig cup things. But that's what matters.
Are you gonna be able to sleep, or are you one of those people who claims that caffeine doesn't affect you?
I'm one of those people who claims that caffeine doesn't affect me, and also have to have 3 cups of it a day. I'm one of those people.
Yeah, yeah, okay. You're like, trust me, my tolerance, it's just to sadness, not to caffeine.
Yeah, it's just too high. I don't even feel anything. I say shaking as I make my way over to the coffee machine at 11 a.m. Get the day started.
That's awesome. So this is our first time chatting, so it's nice to finally meet you. We're kind of in similar spheres, but I think actually no, we've chatted once for like 2 minutes on a Prime panel that you dropped in on. I think.
I think so. Yeah. Have you gotten more erudite in the past like year and a half, I guess, since it's been?
I feel like since I'm still streaming, probably not.
That's
Probably less erudite.
that's fair. I grow more. Wait, are you on Twitch?
Yes.
I grow more special every day that I stream.
Nice. Way to cater that.
That was good. That
Uh,
was real. That wasn't planned out too. That was an actual last moment catch. Maybe I am a little erudite.
well, I put the not so in front, so I always have like an easy out.
Well,
You're
yeah,
like, you should be more erudite. I'm like, I'm not so erudite. It's a
yeah. It's
joke.
it's
Get it?
variance, right? Once you own it, nobody has any expectations set for you, and you're safe. That's the
That's
cool
true.
zone right there.
It's the thinking. I'm impressed. I think you're one of the first people to say my name correctly and know what it means.
Oh, well, given my reputation for being a pretentious piece of shit with the words that I ineptly choose to use, I have to sort of accidentally learn how to pronounce at least a few of them.
Yeah, you're very verbose. Have you ever do you know what the GRE is? It's a test. It's like an aptitude test.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Okay. I don't know if you've ever taken it, but there's a section of the GRE that's called the vocab section. And sometimes when I listen to you, I feel like it's helping me practice for the GRE.
Ha! Just don't get over. I misuse about half these words, so don't get too confident.
Okay.
No
So take notes,
guarantees
but
though.
always, trust but verify is what you're telling me?
Yeah, it's like how when you're in a group setting and most of the people who are hanging out together are drunk and you need to go
Yeah.
to another place and you don't know where it is and there's one guy who's like, it's over here, and it gets the crowd moving, but that guy could be like totally wrong. He's just trying to get people moving. That's me when I
Yeah.
talk. I don't know where it's going. I'm just confident that I want to be moving more than I want to be standing still. And that causes like 90% of my vocal mix-ups.
Huh. I'm still getting yelled at for my camera being super bright. I'm not really sure why the exposure is so high.
It's okay. This is one of the few convos I'll have where the other person is whiter than me. It's great.
That's true. Well, depends on the spheres that you go into. There's some very white spheres.
Oh,
I
that's
think
true.
the most that I could do is turn off lights. Not sure if that helps at all. We're
Yeah,
gonna do the
i- w-
obnoxious technical stuff first.
it's okay. Yeah, yeah, you could turn it down, or you could angle the light so that it's bouncing off the desk and onto the wall, so you're getting twice deflected light on your face rather than first deflected light.
Yeah, I think do a combo of this.
Both of my
How's that
forward-facing
looking?
lights. That looks a lot better. Both of my
Perfect.
front-facing lights don't actually face me. One of them is bouncing off an angled ceiling, and the other one is bouncing off a wall. But I hate looking directly at the light, so, you know.
Okay, I think this is good. So the humanizing. Did you I don't expect it. Usually when people send like long videos that they've done to promote their stuff, I'm like, I appreciate this, but there's a very small chance that I'll be able to watch even like 2 minutes of this. So I don't know if you watch any of the Sneeko humanizing, but did you get a chance, or do you want me to like let your audience know what the goal of this show is?
I did not. So let me and my audience know.
Okay. So um, the goal of the show is essentially to take controversial figures specifically, people who seem to be somewhat divisive. There seems to be massive love for an individual, but also massive hatred for an individual. And the goal is to talk to them and understand who they are as an individual. I think a lot of times, especially when we look at like large content creators, for example, it feels like it's hard to understand the steps of like the human commonalities of like being born, being raised, being a child, being a teenager, going through school, and picturing how they get to where they are now. Like, what are the steps in between? And more importantly, like, why do those steps matter into like forming you as an individual? And so that's kind of the goal. It's supposed to be a program devoted to basically empathizing with people. I'm kind of the view that, for background on me, I'm getting next year
Oh,
and interest is
hold on.
in
Well,
working with.
wait, God intercepted you real quick. You completely cut out. We heard, when you
Okay,
just go back to the beginning of the sentence, you're fine.
sure. Let me drop down my mic sensitivity too.
I think it was just a
Uh,
connection thing rather than a mic sensitivity thing.
okay, so I specialize in forensic clinical adolescent psychology. That's what I'm going to school for next year. So I'm kind of of the view of there's probably not a single group that we can't empathize with. And empathizing doesn't mean yes manning their behaviors, but it doesn't try to like understand like what makes us who we are to some extent. And that's the goal of the humanizing, is to more or less humanize controversial figures. And as you know, you're a controversial figure, Vaush.
I'm learning this for the first time.
Yeah, this is first time news. um, would you prefer if I call you Vaush or Ethan?
Ian, or
Ian,
whichever's
Ian,
better for
sorry.
you.
Yeah.
I don't mind if you call
Uh,
me Ethan either. I'm very
mm,
anarchic in that sense. No, you can
yeah.
call me whatever you like.
Like it can be like a fun pet inside joke name between you and I.
Yeah, well, I
Like,
mean, they
remember that
go
time you
by
interviewed me
Vaush,
and you got me my
Vaush,
name wrong?
Vorsh, right? So people,
Bausch.
yeah, it's just part of the brand at this point.
Yeah. All right. So typically, what I get my guests to do is to turn off their chat, and I do the same, with the goal of essentially, it's really hard not to be somewhat performative when you have immediate, constant feedback from like 2,000 people. Now, obviously, some people are nervous with that, so I won't force you to do that. However, I find that it leads to some of the better interviews, at least for me. So just so you know, my chat will be off, and I invite you to do the same if you're comfortable doing so.
Yeah, sure. I'll play along. Here, I'll cut out the OBS signal on my end of things so they can have fun on the site, but I can't see them then.
Yeah.
Here, I'll do that. I'll close that. Um, all right. And now, because I can't see my own back screen view, I won't know if the cats are doing something silly behind me. But
I'll let you
that's
know.
it's yeah.
Yeah.
Let me
I'll probably
know.
react.
Right. Thank you. If the cats are doing something silly.
Okay. So I guess let's start with like the obvious stuff, which is going to be a lot of people were shocked that you agreed to do this interview with me. Um, they've basically said stuff about like you being on a fortress arc. What made you interested and open to having this conversation with me today?
Oh, well, it sounded like it'd be fun. Unfortunately, I'm not that sophisticated. That's the main reason I do most things. The aversion that I've had to some kinds of online engagement lately is that some of them are kind of black pits. They're like you know, infinite regresses. For instance, the online left. Known to have some contentious figures in it, not just myself. A lot of angry folk there. Arguing with them's fun, but if you over fixate on it, Um, you're not really adding anything new to the content. There's not really any additional analytic engagement taking place. You're just, yelling at folks, which gets less fun. So I've been trying to focus on being a bit more constructive lately. But good convos participate, and that's part of it.
Okay. Have you ever done something similar that like just digs into like you as an individual?
It's happened a couple of times, but they're not usually so explicit about, the interpersonal element.
Yeah. As we said before, I'm all about the fifis. Um, I kind of have, I've tried to coin, you can use this phrase if you like it, but you have to attribute it back to me. I've coined the phrase, it's the anti-Ben Shapiro phrase. Nobody gives a fuck about your facts until you care about until you care about their feelings.
That is true. I was going to call this the homosexual interview, but that also seems like a fine and fair way of putting it.
I like both. Maybe that'll be the title instead of the humanizing. We'll just call it the homosexual interview.
Oh yeah, it's all my
Okay.
interviews actually.
So tell me a bit more about the fortress arcs. You said there's some groups that are like black pits that you don't want to get into. What made you essentially decide to not engage in certain conversations or engage with certain people?
If you're a controversial figure, okay, so audiences are real big, they're always larger than you think they are. When you're interacting with your chat or this or the other, you're only really seeing a tiny portion of the people who watch your stuff. And what I've noticed is when folks get controversial online, there are usually a couple directions they can take that. Some of them just plain ignore it, which is sometimes the right move. It's not for me, but sometimes it is. Um, Sometimes, though, they get so involved in it that whatever was enticing about their content originally kind of falls to the wayside and stops being an emphasis of what they do. And that I
Hmm.
think really sucks. There are channels that are given over entirely to drama, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like drama channels are a thing. But take ContraPoints for example, right? ContraPoints has had a contentious relationship with the online left, at least to some extent. But imagine if every video that she did was like took 2 weeks to produce and was basically just a clapback at all the people who were shit talking her on Twitter the past 2 weeks, and all the broader stuff, all the like socio-political analysis and the cutesy gay art school bullshit, all that fell to the wayside. That suck. You'd lose something good there. So I've just been trying to focus on getting back to stuff that makes the channel, I don't know, a little bit more distinct, rather than just yelling at folks online.
Okay. What is your goal with your channel?
Well, I like political and media analysis the most. I like debates a lot, and I think debates are a really fun way of quickly getting at the heart of some people's political contradictions. But political analysis for me, that's the most fun. And I think debate without it is totally lacking. Of course, debate on its own is not a good metric for finding out who's right or who's wrong. It's a rhetorical exercise. Being right helps in debate, but it's not the deciding factor. Um, so without a good kind of like supporting interest and analysis, identifying social problems, learning how to fit them within given frameworks, look through them. If you can't do that, frankly, all of this is just, you know, um, jaw exercise. You need to be able to do that for any of the rest of it to mean something.
Okay. So being right helps. You like political discourse the most. What do you like? If you could wave a wand and everyone who viewed your channel would walk away with like one concept or idea that you think is really important, what would you want to be communicated to people?
Probably never to essentialize. That's the main problem that I run up against. And this is there's something you taught in sociology, at least I was in university, called the sociological imagination. The basic idea is that nothing is ever the way it is simply because it is the way it is. Every society around the world, the reason their culture is what it is, the reason they speak what they speak, their food, everything about them, everything about what we are and what we do, why the Nazis believed what the Nazis did, what we believe what we do. Nothing just is. There are always reasons. It always goes back. There's an infinite, like, recursive, analysis you can do going back to the beginning of time. You choose a point to start and you move from there. And if people forget that, you fall into these problems where people develop really essentialist perspectives on sociological problems. Well, why are white people like this? Well, they just are. Oh, why are black people like this? Well, they just are. Men and women and so on. If people could not do that, I think that you would essentially upend reactionary politics overnight.
Would you say then that that's like one of your personal like ethics? Do you have like a set of like kind of concretized personal ethics that you try to follow? Because this sounds like a really good ethic, not just a good kind of like way to think about things.
Yeah, well, I guess no simple answers would be like a good general motif there. If there were any simple answers to social problems, then there wouldn't be there wouldn't be a need for any of this, of course. And that's not to say sometimes the solutions aren't simple, you know. A simple solution can be backed by a really complicated answer, you know. Rather just to say like there will always be people who are trying to sell you on the idea that everything is the way it is for very simple reasons, and like just adopt this worldview and like everything falls into place. And I just don't think that's fair or valid. I see leftists try to do that as well, and I think often they do so while misinterpreting leftist theory. So I just don't. It's not, just not a good road to go down. It always leads to bad analysis.
It makes me think of I'm sure like in science you often learn like keep it simple stupid or Occam's razor. Do you think that Occam's obviously I would argue most people don't understand what Occam's razor actually is. They tend to conflate Occam's razor with keep it simple stupid. Would you basically fully disagree with the concept of let's start with first keep it simple stupid?
Yeah. Well, in the understanding you have of the issue, I think that it should be kept simple, especially when it comes to communicating that. Oftentimes this stuff isn't as complicated as people like to make it out to be. Or to put it another way, you could have like a PhD level background in Marxian theory, and that could inform an analysis of a subject. But you could probably also get a pretty concrete understanding of that issue based on a high school education, or even less, you know? You can appeal to simpler values. It's what would you say? It's like it's a fractal. There's an infinite level of complexity. You can always go one layer deeper, you know? It's like trying to find the length of America's border coast, you know, across the West Coast. Well, it's like 3,000 miles from a satellite, but if you get up and look at every individual grain of sand and count along that border, you'd have millions of miles of border. So it's a meaningless question. There's nothing wrong with using the satellite answer as long as you acknowledge that's what you're doing and don't pretend there aren't other ways of doing it.
Okay, interesting. Do you think it's really important though to communicate? Because you kind of said like you can analyze things from a really complex lens, but you want to communicate in a more simple way. Do you think it's really important to communicate to like audiences more simple answers, or do you think it's important to communicate both? Like how do you find the balance between that?
I think it's possible to communicate really complicated ideas in simple language most of the time. One of the nice things about sociology is that you don't need technical definitions very often when you're reducing a subject down to its simplest point. When you're talking about something in the fields of like agriculture or engineering or physics, sometimes you have
Mhm.
these irreducible points where it's like, okay, you need to know what this term means or you can't move forward. Most
Mhm.
sociological terms are intuitive to us because we live in a society. So we know a lot of the basic building blocks around us, even if we're not that well educated in how they work. And because of that, we have to take advantage of this, right? We have to, if there is a medium through which you can get these answers across easily, I think you should try to as best as you can. But you should always kind of remind people like there's always a greater degree of complexity. Like there's always more to it, you know? It's like that, all I know is that I know nothing thing, where people get educated in a field, and when they get their PhD, they're like, "Well, I don't know anything about any of this. I'm a
Mhm.
fucking idiot."
Yeah.
That's a good attitude to have. I think we should all have that on many issues.
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the like the core values that I try to encourage in my viewers in my much smaller access to people, but also fundamentally for myself is to maintain some level of epistemic humility of like realizing that while there's like, a small circle of things that I do know, and there's a much bigger circle of things that the entire human race knows, there's an even bigger circle of things that we don't know, and we don't know that we don't know it. Which I think is really important, especially like in the sciences and in thought to be reminded of, which makes me think of that. So sociology. So did you do your undergrad? I don't know your education background fully.
Just an undergrad, and yes, in sociology with a minor in communications.
Okay, interesting. What made you decide to go into sociology?
Well, I originally favored the hard sciences because I'm autistic. But when I was in 12th grade, I had an advanced history professor, um,
Mm.
Professor Hinojosa. Or I guess it would have been Mr. Hinojosa because it was high school. I don't know. Anyway, great guy, very hot, and great educator. Class was on comparative political systems. How does Iran's government work compared to Russia, Brazil, America, the UK, and a couple others? Learn a
Interesting.
lot just, comparing stuff like that. Oh, well, why do we do it this way as opposed to this? And then you go back to the 14th century or something. Got me into social sciences. When I went to community college afterwards, I tried out political science, but I really didn't like how, for lack of a better term, like amoral political science is. Political science felt like it was all about explaining why things are the way they are, but there wasn't much of an activist element to it, you know? Like if you go into a sociology 101 class and you're learning about like the history of white supremacy in the United States, the teacher is not just going to tell you about it. Like they're telling a good versus evil narrative, which I like.
Mhm.
I'm okay with moralizing issues, in an educational sense. But if you're talking like in poli sci, like the classes that I took, it was like, well, these countries are democracies because they have the political capital and these economic forces and blah blah, and these countries are authoritarian, and like that's just how it is. It was very matter of fact, and I didn't like that. It felt like that analysis didn't leave much room for making the world better. So I tried sociology, and I loved that.
Okay, so you like specifically kind of the political moralized element that's included within the sociological analysis of the world.
Yes, overwhelmingly. Not all professors are going to be like that, but the field as a whole is definitely tilted in that direction.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've talked to a lot of sociology professors and majors and stuff like that, and I feel like a lot of times they kind of deny that that's the case. Whereas, like, as somebody who's psych is obviously we do our best to be like as amoral as possible all the time. Like, we're highly, highly clinical and very individual in our analysis. And it's interesting. I'd be curious if maybe is that generally in sociology acknowledged that, like, yeah, we're highly moralized and
I,
political
I
in
think
our
it's
analysis.
it's generally understood that the purpose of understanding something is so that you can change that thing, at least in the field of sociology. I think that there
Mm.
would be a political bias to psychiatry because your bias is towards psychiatric normalcy. The idea that there are like operating limits of the human brain, and if they go outside of that, then it's like you have like schizophrenics or people are unhealthy or self-destructive. So the bias would be towards self-care there, like a healthy life. And I think the same can be applied to sociology. Obviously, it's a bit more scaled up. What does a healthy society look like? Find 50 people, they'll give you 51 answers. But there are some general commonalities, right? Oh, the world that we live in is unfortunately not exactly bereft of like easy evil good examples. Genocides happen all the time. Like millions will die, and the news will barely cover it sometimes. In a world like this, I think there are definitely examples you can point to and go like, what socioeconomic factors led to like the Rwanda genocide, and how do we keep that from happening again? And I think it's fine to approach things that way because otherwise, if you could imagine a class where somebody was going over what led to the Holocaust and there was no moralizing there, it was just, well, when societies have, political tensions that they need to resolve by scapegoating an ethnic group, it would come across a bit strange because culturally we're used to associating the Nazis with the bad guys. And I think that's good.
Hmm.
We should always remember that there's a reason why we're learning all this crap.
Hmm. Okay.
Gotcha.
We interesting. So, major in sociology, minor in communications. Have you pursued any other education past that, or is that around the time? Like, when did you get involved in streaming compared to your education?
It was 6 months after I got my bachelor's. The area that I
Whoa.
Yeah, so that's the end of it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
the area that I was in had a very bad job market. Humboldt State University up in Humboldt County in Northern California. The economy there is absolute junker. So after I graduated, I just could not find a job at all. I didn't have a car either, and because everything's so spread out and there's no public transport, it was like a 2 hour commute here and there, and money was drying up and so on. So I tried streaming for a bit, and after a little while of that, I realized I was making more per hour of streaming than I would have through minimum wage in the area anyway. So I just stuck to it and grew from there.
Okay. And so, what inspired you to decide to start streaming? Was it just like it's accessible, or there must have been something else for you that like triggered that?
Well, first of all, I really like public speaking. So the idea of getting to do that anyway, just tremendously fun. I've always been one of those insufferable people who, nowadays you go to a Discord server, but you see back in my day, you would like find people's Skype tags or whatever and argue with them through that. It was a more involved process, but I've always liked arguing with folks. So there's that. Of course, as a fan of Destiny's content for like a solid 8 years, 6 years, some length of time prior. So I was fully familiar with live streaming and all of the technical necessities, leading into it. Um, and my folks have always been big into tech. My father and my grandfather both were always very computer oriented. So the idea of like doing a job through a webcam didn't seem that strange to me. Felt like it'd be fun to try.
Okay. So techie family is what does your mom do? Or is she in the picture? Or what's kind of your family dynamic? So to start with, what's your family dynamic situation before I ask about it?
Oh, just a good old white picket fence, classic American homeboy, Beverly Hills, early childhood. Oh, my mother, father, myself, and my brother. My mom does administrative work. She's with a project a coordination company, or what's the
Hmm.
term? Project. Basically, they make larger projects happen by coordinating between a bunch of different firms, engineering, plumbing,
Yeah.
electrician, that kind of stuff. My father does VFX work in Hollywood, and has for quite a while moved out to LA to do that. Um, and then my brother's actually a chef, and he's real good at it too. Damn talented, better than me. At everything. It's great. So no, it's a very good family unit. Blessed am I.
Are you older or younger?
I'm older. So
Okay. Interesting. So you're older. I noticed you said, and my brother's better at me than everything. What's the age difference between you two?
I'm 4 years older than him. I just love the hell out of him. That's all.
Yeah.
And he's so damn good at cooking too. It's actually crazy.
Does he professionally cook then?
Oh no, proper chef. I mean, real talented. I had him visit a little while ago, and we'd go out to the market, and he made some food that tasted better than any crap I've ever eaten at a restaurant. He's got
Yeah.
a remarkable talent for it, especially at his age. He's going to go far.
Okay. So has he trained or anything, or is he professional
No, no,
chef?
he is. Yeah, he's a chef at a very prominent restaurant,
Okay.
uh,
Cool.
off in LA.
Okay. So super classic nuclear family, two kids, mom, dad. Um, Normal stuff on both sides, grandma, grandpa on both sides,
Off and about,
decently
yeah.
interconnected.
They're all in Florida and Alabama and such. My extended family, so they're more conservative. Not all of them, but a lot of them, and more
Okay.
southern.
Do you interact with the further ones, the conservative parts of your family much?
From time to time. Right now, Hurricane Ian is coming down on Florida, so I got an angry text or two from my extended
Yeah.
family for causing a state of emergency in their fine state. Um,
That's pretty rude of you, to be honest. I don't know
yeah,
why
it's
you'd just
pretty.
I mean, if you want to be invited to the family parties, you could just come. You don't have to like incite a hurricane.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've been to a family reunion. My grandpa sent me a bunch of guns a while back too, so I'd say I get along pretty well with most everyone in my family.
Okay. What did they think about your streaming career?
They don't know. I don't know how much they'd appreciate the line of politics I've taken for this venture. So
They
what
don't
they
know
don't
at
know will
all?
hurt them. No.
Really? Because you're not exactly like a small figure on the internet anymore.
Oh, well, they're they're pretty old, so they're sort of
Okay.
annulled from these cultural developments. Thank God. Um, and it's probably for the best. I don't know how far right they are exactly, but they're probably pretty far along there.
Okay. And then what about your mom, dad? They like this stuff? What do they think about it?
They're both like liberal leaning socialists, though I think they've moved more to the left in the past few years. I don't know how much of that is because of me and how much of that is because of material conditions, but no, they're very supportive of the work that I do. They've been supportive from day one.
Okay. So you grew up, were you middle class? What socioeconomic status were you?
Middle class, but Beverly Hills is a really nice neighborhood to grow up in. It's like,
Yeah.
you live in a great neighborhood, but you're spending 60% of the income on the rent to continue living there, you know? But Beverly
Hmm.
Hills don't have much crime, and the school districts are good. So it's at least for them, and in my case, I think worth the trade-off for any other. You could live out in like the valley north of Los Angeles and buy a boat or something, but Beverly Hills is nice.
Okay. Yeah. Beverly Hills, there's like a song like Beverly Hills.
Woo!
You know that
That's
one?
where I wanna be. Yep.
Yeah. Is it because whenever I hear Beverly Hills, it sounds like there's like, you know, Hollywood celebrities like walking down the street. It sounds like that's not quite accurate.
Sometimes. Rodeo Boulevard, you can reliably see celebrities there. I saw Stan Lee on Beverly Drive once. I've seen a couple of famous people while walking around the Century City Mall. which is in the Century City Park. It's just a business district, like right next to Beverly Hills.
Mm.
The part of Beverly Hills people tend to refer to with the pop culture is the Hills part of Beverly Hills, because all of the commercial district, all the stuff people know Beverly Hills for in terms of its like amenities, that's all on flatland. But there's a hilly portion of Beverly Hills, which is where all the super rich people live. Um,
Oh,
I,
okay.
so we could not even close. I think my family's combined income, like for the year, could afford maybe half of 1 month of rent up there. Insane.
Yeah.
I actually had I had to go up there once because I had a class project in high school, and whose house do we go to glue this paper onto this plywood, whatever. So we
Yeah.
go up to this person's house, and it's disgustingly large, of course. A proper mansion. It has a pool. It has a tennis court in the back. Um, and when I entered, their parents, who are blissfully bourgeois, just like insufferable, um, are pointing me out these boudoirs on the left and right side of the entry foyer of their mansion. And they're like, oh, yes, this one right here is an authentic 17th century French boudoir. And then they point to an identical one to my left, and they're like, and that's a recreation from the 19th century. And like, I'm here to glue paper onto wood, entirely too much, absolutely insufferable. But people do live up there.
Interesting. So when you were going to school then, was there kind of like two different distinct culture groups within the same schools of like the most rich? Because you were mentioning it was like a friend for a school project. So that means like some of the richest of the rich are also going to school with like, obviously it's not lower class individuals, but it is middle class. Was there any of that divide, or what was schooling like for you?
Yeah, there was, because like interestingly, a lot of the kids who went to Beverly High weren't that rich, because the rich kids in Beverly Hills go to private schools. The private schools in Beverly Hills are world class. And a lot of them are Jewish, because there's a lot of Jewish people in Beverly Hills. So comparatively speaking, Beverly Hills High had fewer Jewish people for the neighborhood, poorer people, and was probably therefore, a lot less insufferable, because going to one of those private schools, I'm pretty sure like their income would have been exponentially higher um
Mm.
than that of my family's, which, cultural differences and all that. Um
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of a weird situation. I've never even been inside one of those private schools, but they loom like little miniature fortresses over parts of the neighborhood, which is it's just a very strange vibe.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. So there's kind of this. So did you go to public school then growing up?
Yeah, yeah, the whole way through. Oh,
Okay, public school all the way through, and then went to like what was the university? It sounded like it was a more like affordable or moderately priced
oh
university.
yeah, it was Humboldt State. They'll take anyone. If you threw a rock at their admissions office, they would accept it before it hit their desk. They're not that discerning, and my grades were not that great in high school. Nor, admittedly, were they that great in university, but they were better in university, so that's something. Yeah, I mostly went up there not for their educational attainment, but rather because I was interested in the culture and community of Northern California, having grown up in an incredibly sunny, cultureless, and stiflingly bourgeois Beverly Hills. I wanted to see how I felt walking around what's essentially like a summer camp built into a redwood mountainside, for a couple years, and see how that went.
Okay, interesting. Do you mind bearing with me for 2 seconds? My husband just texted me and said that there's something super wrong with my stream.
Oh,
Apparently, it's like frozen or something. One
it did
second.
freeze for a sec, but it's come back now.
Yeah, it sounds like it's cutting like crazy for everyone.
Oh, okay. Well,
Which is super unfortunate, and it
I ain't
looks
going
like Twitch
nowhere.
is completely down. It might even require a restart then on my computer's side because I'm not sure what else would be causing it.
That's all
Because
right.
my
I'll cheat
CPU
and peek at
usage is
chat
good.
for a little bit.
Yeah, you can cheat.
Hi, Chad. How you doing? They
Yeah, the
say hi.
computer's fine. They say hi. That's good. Okay. It's been fine. It looks like YouTube is still scuffed though.
I am very
Huh.
anti-Semitic. I'm not anti-Semitic. What the fuck? They're being mean to me.
Your chat is?
Yeah,
Is your
now they're
chat
being mean
overly
to
warm
me.
toward you?
Yeah, they're being fucking rude. What the fuck?
Yeah, it looks like basically my entire Twitch just muted. They have zero sound for them all of a sudden.
That is extremely wacky. Well,
Yeah,
I
have you
can
ever had that?
provide
My Twitch
you
does this almost every stream where like 10 minutes it'll just mute. My mic's fine, everything on my side is fine. It just mutes everything.
my audio at the end of this. You've come through on my end, so that won't be lost at least. I don't know if you're recording locally or if you pull from your Twitch VODs, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't usually record locally just to not drain my computer too much. I don't have a super bourgeois computer.
Oh, that's good. That means you have a
Um,
proletarian computer,
that's
an
true.
ally of
Yeah.
the revolution.
I guess it depends on where the parts are from. Okay, it looks like sound is working again on stream. Okay. Well, it's probably corrected itself.
Goodbye, chat.
Okay.
Howdy.
Wow, my voice sounds so high pitched when I hear myself through yours.
Well, I think you might just have a high-pitched voice. Also, I don't, so the contrast is there. Hello again, chat. Feel that I saw you.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, okay. My voice just went super chipmunk for a while too. I don't know what is Twitch's issue. I always have this issue and only with Twitch. I'm not sure why.
They're having a labor revolt back at the servers after all those
Like
announcements
this
they made the other
stupid
day.
white bitch. Fuck her. Okay, where were we? Asking you about school and stuff like this. So you got into sociology because you like the moralized piece. What got you interested in this stuff? Because like it's not the average child that gets born into the world and is like, man, I just want to like, fight for political moral movements, that's a very unique thing. So what triggered you into that?
Well, I like arguments. That I've always liked. I've always liked speaking publicly. I've always liked arguments. That's been a since I was 5 years old thing, you know. That goes back a long while. And I like systemic analysis. I like systemic analysis of any kind, really, whether it's sociological or physical, like you give me like a bridge or something and you have all the arrows and how the forces settle and everything. I think that's very interesting. I think it's cool to break things down to their constituent parts. But if you want to really argue with people over something, the real dicey topics are in sociology. I know them engineers, will bludgeon each other with their protractors while arguing over like the most efficient, way to distribute a load or whatever. But folks love arguing politics, and I like arguing politics. And if you add that to the systemic analysis factor, I think it all just gets so much more interesting. Psychology itself, of course, is a massively reliant on systemic analysis because that's the process by which you break down, the characteristics you consider to be, like beneficial to oneself and elsewise, like what leads to what. I think it's just kind of the root of education, frankly. Breaking something down to its constituent parts, seeing how it works, then trying to reassemble it. And I suppose that people will just fall in, whichever direction they're kind of preordained to based on their pre-existing interests if they get the opportunity to choose between those fields.
Okay. Um, okay, I'm gonna be an asshole. I'm gonna restart my computer. It is crashing over and over and over
That's
again on
okay.
my
I could
side.
tell you were distracted. Give it a go.
Yeah, sorry. I started like my phone starts like vibrating over and over again, and it's like fuck. Okay. I'll be right back.
I believe in you.
Thanks.
Hi, chat. How y'all doing? Having a fun convo? Well, I'm the one having the convo, not you. So I'm having a fun convo. The Vushahadin who did it? Yeah, of course. Oh, excuse me. Vaush, she's super hot. You guys got to keep it together. You got to hold it together, folks. My see you Coomers whenever I excuse me, reopen the OBS window. Pigeon. God, she's weird. God, she's such a weird little goofy little fucking weirdo. Stop being weird about every woman in chat challenge. Merrick, to be fair, the last time you were on stream and you were on cam, after I closed the video window, I think the first thing that I said was boing. Which, to be fair... So, wacky world out there. Thanks, Vaush. Love that. Didn't you know that? I thought chat told you that. Not being so obvious when attracted will go a long way for helping someone get laid. Yeah, if you're ever attracted to a girl, that's why negging is the thing, right? You have to be like, you're fucking ugly, and then spit at her feet, and then walk away. And that way, you know, you've sort of calmed her, you know? God. Not a fan of calling luxury disgusting. Oh, I am. Oh, wait. Depends on the luxury, okay? If by luxury you mean like a very well-crafted like computer or piece of machinery or something, like whatever. That mansion that I went to when I was a kid, I will call that disgusting to my dying day, okay? Nobody, this is like a family of 4. Nobody needs like some colossal like 3-story, 15-bathroom, tennis court pool Uber mansion. Absolutely not. Luxury isn't inherently bad, but excess is. It has to be because it's excess. Excess is defined by being too much. Yeah, gross opulence, yeah. Wasn't even tasteful. Because you can't even afford to renovate houses like that. They're too, like, nice, you know? Even if you could afford to buy one, like, building a new one. The weird thing is that a lot of the, like, mega mansions in Beverly Hills, this is the kind of thing that I will never understand, okay? If you're going to buy a mansion, why would you buy one that looks like it was made in Minecraft in, like, 3 seconds? I genuinely don't get this, okay? I'm okay with, like, sleek modernism when it comes to proletarian architecture, but if you're dropping 25 million on a house, like, why would you make it look like this? Like, why is there, like, where's the, like, personality? Beverly Hills has some disgusting houses. Look at this. I walked by this house so many times. This is in, like, a regular residential area. Like, this is like a regular single-family home zoning area, meaning that houses next to it can just be, like, standard Los Angeles, like ranch-style homes with, like, the one big, like, garage driveway and then, like, the thing. It's not huge. No, no, no. I'm not saying that it's huge. I'm saying that it's fucking tasteless. Like, you have, like, regular houses to your left and your right, and then you have this, like, gilded manor gate uh, being, like, surrounded by these 2-foot-tall stone walls. It's pretentious. It's like the McMansion thing, except it doesn't have, like, the property, like, the property size to be a McMansion. Oh, the call's happening again. Oop.
Hello.
Howdy! You can actually test audio off of my howdy, because I say it the exact same way every time. Her headphones are off. She can't hear me.
There we go.
Hello.
Holy moly. I guess our internet was just going on the fritz. So luckily your VOD's beautiful. So we'll probably, if you don't mind, my editor's for sure going to steal your version and not.
Yeah, they can steal it if they like, for sure. Yeah, it's been known to happen. Our Wi-Fi has been on the fritz lately. I think we're just getting fucked about a little bit. Such is life.
Oh, maybe it's Hurricane Ian. It's just coming through full of electromagnetic pulses or something like that.
Well, eventually that is going to be how it goes, isn't it? You know, folks are going to wonder about internet outages, and they're just going to look at what typhoon is menacing their local coast.
That's true. That's true. It's almost like we've done a full roundabout in that we've built up our scientific theories to the point that we fall right back to kind of superstitious. We're going to soon have people doing modern day rain dances and whatnot to ward off the bad juju.
Fuck yeah, dude. I'll be right out there.
Based. Okay. I apologize for that, and thank you for being gracious and understanding. You like arguments.
Yeah, it's been known to happen.
You've always been disagreeable.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Does that get
Yeah.
you into trouble? Like, does that damage your interpersonal relationships, or what impact does that have on your life?
Oh, for sure. I'm holistically argumentative. That means with my family and partners and everyone else too. Some people are fine with that, and those are the people I tend to get along the best with, and some people aren't, and obviously that was never really going to work out. Thankfully, my family tolerates it, and as I've gotten older, I've gotten a bit better at knowing how to place it, like, which arguments are worth having, I mean. Like, I would never argue with my grandpa or something, right? Like, what the fuck's the point of that? Like, dude's 90 or something, I'm not gonna, like, why? Um,
Yeah.
but it's definitely sort of a general trait. Frankly, I think that more people should be argumentative. One of the big problems that I've had interpersonally is that people tend to be very shy when it comes to their personal desires or beliefs. So rather than
Mhm.
expressing them confidently, they kind of clam up and they don't really say anything. So you don't like know where they stand on something. You don't know if they're getting upset or if they agree with you or whatever. That's kind of frustrating. I think people should be direct.
Do you have a hard time in general with like in kind of implicit stuff or like indirect stuff? Like, 'cause I find a lot of people who prefer the more explicit stuff also tend to sometimes struggle in the more implied or
Oh,
unclear
yeah, for
things.
sure. Oh, yeah, this is 100% an autism thing, absolutely. I try to get folks to be direct as possible when I'm talking with them because I hate ambiguity of any kind,
Right.
when interpersonally or in debate or anything like that. Um, but I think that's holistically good, though. I think, even people who are neurotypical would benefit from people being more direct with each other. I mean, how many rom-coms, the normiest of all genres, right? How many rom-coms are, like, sort of predicated on miscommunication between people who don't like each other or do like each other or something, right? It clearly it's a problem we all suffer from. So directness is good, I think.
Right. So when you speak about the autism, when were you diagnosed? It sounds like there's a legitimate diagnosis there. So when did you get diagnosed with autism?
That was like it must have been like 6 or 7 or something. Actually, the
Okay.
interesting thing is I didn't get officially written down. The gist of it was that at the time, because of Beverly Hills school district policy, as I
Mhm.
understand, I'm remembering this from like 15 years ago or maybe longer. So I'm trying to remember this proper. But if I remember correctly, um, if you got diagnosed with something like autism or ADHD, you got automatically referred to the special needs courses, which wasn't
Mhm.
deemed necessary for me because I was doing just fine in the classes. So the my parents was like, "Hey, why is my son a moron?" Hit my head. And the doctor's like, "Oh yeah, it's definitely autism, but like if I write you up, like this will happen probably." And my parents were like, probably not. We're not going to do that then." So it's just been sort of the undiagnosed diagnosis since then, which has been sort of reinforced every mannerism that I've engaged in since. But I'm happy that they didn't go through that because them special needs courses are fucking terrible. They are
Yeah.
100% about finding a box to throw like different kids in. It's super fucked up.
Interesting. Okay. So um, a lot of people who are neurodivergent tend to really struggle in kind of the what I would argue is the very neurotypical structures that we've arisen, particularly with like academics and schooling. And yet you've pursued pretty high levels of academia. What how did you navigate that with autism? Like did you have major struggles? Did you get any students with disabilities supports, or were you just like really, really high functional?
I'm reasonably high functional, so I don't want to pretend that it was all just me muscling up and getting through it. Um, I was too prideful to try and seek any help, so I did real bad with all the homework and such. But I like studying for tests. I like doing well in tests, and you can reason out most of the answers to a test from the test itself if you know a bit about the subject material. So I
Mhm.
didn't struggle too much with any of that. It's not like American education's like that difficult or anything. It's more the social responsibilities and expectations of schooling, I think, that a lot of folks struggle with. Thankfully, it's a lot easier to like get around some of the difficult stuff if you really, really, really like speaking. Because if you do really like speaking, you can kind of gamify the parts of social interactions that you would normally otherwise struggle with and not have to deal with those in the way you might otherwise have to.
Right. So obviously the autism diagnosis typically has to do with both rigid behaviors and like other things. I've noticed, for example, you do like a beard stroking. Somebody tried to tell me that that was like Tourette's. Is that just an autistic, like self-soothing tick?
It's a stimming thing. I try not to do that because it's fucking annoying. But yeah, I do it before I even realize I'm doing it. I'm trying not to right now. I'm
Yeah.
trying to willpower my way out of that one. It's like biting your
Well, it
nails.
is self-stimming. Yeah. Most self-stimming is kind of like it's happening and then you realize that you're doing it.
Yeah, it's super annoying. Yeah, if it was like a conscious behavior, it'd be easy enough to stop. But you don't even realize that it's happening. So.
Okay. So, what was your interpersonal life growing up? Because, so for example, just to have context, my dad actually has autism.
Hell
And
yeah.
so, interpersonally has been, we didn't realize this until I was like 19 to 20. And then all of a sudden I was like, my entire childhood makes so much more sense now. Like so much more sense. With like a lot of his like really rigid behaviors that became like really big problems and like big blow ups and stuff. I was like, oh, like there's a reason behind all of this. Did you find that there was many like interpersonal issues that arose for you that you would like lay at the feet of autism, or
Well,
what was that experience like for
I
you?
was really bad at understanding other people's intentions for a long time. I got better
Mhm.
at it just sort of over time, just through the natural process of sort of self-education. And I got a lot better at it when I started streaming because it's actually really difficult to be autistic when you're streaming because all your
Yes.
behavior is getting like micro scrutinized constantly by a huge audience. So if you do anything that's even a little bit weird, you'll immediately be made aware of it and you'll try to like, or it's very rapid education there. So that's helpful in a way. Um, but earlier on in my life, I was really bad at reading people's intentions, and I was just a giant cringe lord, just a full-on like fedora tipping atheist type, like libertarian, like no, like the whole archetype. You know what I
Madam.
mean? Yeah, no,
Yeah.
like just an utter buffoon. But I owned it very confidently, which I think that's important, right? Because for me, I wasn't doing it because I thought it would make something of me. I was doing it because I was authentically that cringe. So, at the very least, it was a direct expression of my my divergent tendencies there. It didn't exactly earn me many friends up through high school, but as
Mhm.
long as you make your way through that process feeling reasonably self-confident, I think that's okay.
Yeah, it's really interesting talking with people, especially like neurotypical people who are not used to anybody with autism, is the breakdown of communication that happens at like both layers of both. Like oftentimes, autistic people will misread, misunderstand what's being communicated. And then when they communicate back, the neurotypical person will also typically misunderstand and misread what the autistic person is trying to communicate. And so there's often kind of dual layers of miscommunication going on, which is a really big thing I had to work on with my dad once I realized that was going on, is being like, oh, we're missing each other at two levels. Like I'm missing what he's saying and he's missing what I'm saying back.
Yeah, no, I completely agree 100%, which is why I favor bluntness, because the more direct everyone involved is, the less likely that miscommunication is to occur. Like you can be in like the lesbian situation where both people are saying like I want to fuck you and both of them are thinking, "Oh, is she just being nice?" So it's possible that even total directness can be met with obliviousness, but I think it's much more difficult the more upfront people are being. Which is why I tend to favor that. And neurotypical people get confused with each other all the time as well. So it's just a big old mess. People are scared. There's a lot of cowardice when people communicate. It's this like meta game of what you're willing to give and what you're not willing to give, which there can be value to playing. It's just a general part of participating in like the socialization process. You can't like undo
Mhm.
society overnight or some bullshit like that. But I do think you can help a bit by being like the straight shooter in the group. I think people appreciate that. I think that's a good thing to be.
Right. But then as being a straight shooter, you're going to get hit with the fact of sometimes bluntness also is like not very sensitive to how people are feeling. Right. So like bluntness runs the risk of like hurting people's feelings and upsetting people and like offending people.
That's true.
How have you navigated that?
I think you should be blunt about you and not so blunt about other people. Like the more a topic is on a subject where the entirety of your knowledge is like kind of covers it, like your feelings or how you're interacting with it, how you feel about something. Like in those instances, I think bluntness is always good. I guess there's still ways to fuck that up, but for the most part, you know. But if you're making statements about other people, like for example, people with insecurities, right? It's a minefield talking to people with insecurities because God only knows, right? It's a whole thing. Trying to be blunt there, even if you're really like, you know, you're very charismatic, you know what's going on, you know this person, probably not a good idea because, you know, maybe it'll work, but it probably won't. It's probably not worth the risk either. But being straightforward just about your feelings, I think once people realize that that's what you're doing, they get a lot more comfortable around you because they kind of stop doing this constant second triple guessing on whether or not you're playing some other game. I noticed that a lot, not just interpersonally. It happens a lot in my experience. I mean, obviously when people are like macking up each other or whatever, you know, people are flirting. But also like in interactions where there's an imbalance in income, right? Because I make a lot off streaming. So it's like, you know, oh, I'll pay for your drink or whatever. And a lot of people, when they hear that, it's like, what are they getting out of this? Or like, is something
Is
being
there a
bought?
string? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And that's really annoying from my perspective because I just, you know, I'll just whatever, I'll buy the thing. But the more direct you are, I think the less that crops up, and that's preferable.
Okay. Interesting. So, how is navigating Twitch politics not the topic, but the people within it for you? Because one thing that I've noticed, I think some of the royalty drama recently has shown, is that there's tons and tons of subtle, implicit posturing and positioning and like things that are being used. Like you can, if you say one word slightly off, that can like blow the cover for everyone. And I've kind of realized it seems to be like optics is the name of the game. Um, and I know when I've listened to you, you've also talked about how like optics is really valuable. But optics in many ways is to some extent like it's oftentimes creating like a visage or there's a facade in front of you because the optics matter more. So like creating what looks to be a way sometimes matters more than what's actually going on. How do you how did you stumble into this world and like how do you navigate that?
Honest to God, I know this sounds like every basic bitch. I hate drama. I don't start drama. I genuinely hate navigating those kind of social spaces. If you, the 99% of streamers are very weird. No, there's an expectation in the especially the just chatting environment where there's like this giant meta game about who likes who and like who says what to imply what about who or what. I can't keep up with this stuff. I'm not capable. I don't even try to. I've always had very straightforward relationships with all of the people that I have like any like in all of the left YouTube space, right?
Mhm.
I'm very unambiguous. If somebody does something that I don't like and somebody brings it up in chat, I could just, oh, wait, that was really fucking stupid of them. And I'll just leave it at that, you know? I've never thought like I should hold off on this because it might, I don't know, it might benefit me in some way to play a kind of strategic ambiguity here. Um, I think, like, so an example would be Hassan, right? Hassan is the person for whom I could benefit the most to suck up to, just due to adjacency in our political values and the size of his audience. And I've never really made an effort to, not because I'm some like enlightened, super principled Uber streamer who would never, you know, sink to clout farming or whatever. Um, but it's just really tiring to have to think about that stuff, you know? Like if a person that you have to maintain a good relationship does something stupid and somebody asks you about it and you have to like pretend you didn't see the message in chat. I know people do this. It's exhausting. I don't want any part of it. So I would rather just be straightforward and you know, whatever friendships that does or does not earn me, I think that's fine.
Okay. So this kind of leads me to some of the things that I wanted to ask you about, which is obviously you've had some like pretty major dramas in the space with different figures. And I'm now that I'm understanding about the autism and stuff, just so maybe everyone has an understanding for you, what does autism mean? Like what do people need to understand about you when you say like I have a diagnosis of autism? That maybe would help neurotypicals, for example, like ground themselves in like having some level of understanding of what that actually means.
I don't normally ask anything of people with regards to it. I think I'm high functioning enough that I don't feel like I generally need accommodations. I mean, if there are tendencies that people are looking for, or like, oh, well, what would I be looking to identify to understand this or that, you know? Like a preference toward bluntness, a general inability to read ambiguity or mixed signals, an unwillingness to play complicated social games outside very basic, I'm on good terms with this person, bad terms with that person. Yeah, stuff like that. And I think I'm pretty consistent about those tendencies. That tends to crop up pretty, pretty consistently, I think.
Mhm. One thing that's really interesting to you about me is how sardonic your humor style is, because to some extent, like sarcasm and being sardonic, there's an implied tonality to change entirely what the words you're using are implying or meaning, which is very antithetical of like kind of this blunt, explicit directness that you're mostly talking about. It's something that I find very interesting about you. Have you always been very sardonic in your humor style?
With varying levels of success, yeah. I just think it's real funny. I like stand-up comedians a lot. I've always preferred the jokes that are delivered through kind of like a veil of obvious insincerity because well, part of it's just literally because I find it funnier, it's purely like an aesthetic appreciation to some extent. And I think a lot of it is also, how do I put this? I'm controversial for a number of reasons, and the last thing a person trusts is an earnest defense mounted by a person they don't trust. If a person is disliked or distrusted, anything they say to their defense will come across as additional, self-indictment. Obviously, they're saying this, they're trying to distract from this or that, or, they're trying to pull people away from this. But I think that sarcasm tends to work a bit differently because for sarcasm to work, you have to be self-aware, especially if you're being, well, sarcastic about yourself. And I think that it disarms people a little bit, and I think it makes them a little bit more aware of the fact that I have to know what other people think of me to make those comments. So, for example, if you're like imagine you're like a very sensitive like left person on Twitter or whatever, and you think I'm a fascist or something. Just watching a video of me saying, "Of course I'm not a fascist. All my political values differ from those of fascists. I have always argued against fascism." You know what? This won't convince anyone. Um,
Mhm.
but if you can make some joke, "Oh, of course I'm a fascist. That's why I believe this, that, or the other," and you lean into it a little bit, as long as they pick up on the sarcasm, which admittedly they don't always, but whatever. I think the implied self-awareness gives them a little bit more charitability with which to view me. So I like it. I think it's a good tool. And I think it shouldn't be used as a kind of um, replacement for dishonesty, where you get around saying things by being sarcastic. You should always be able to clarify and say, "Oh, that
Mm.
was a joke. This is exactly what I truly believe." The rest of it was just sort of a aesthetic fabrication.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've been noticing in our exchange so far is I'm trying to figure out precisely when you're being purely sardonic and you wholly don't mean what you're saying because there's different levels of irony, right? Sometimes it's like a 50-50. You kind of mean it, but you're saying it in a humorous way to kind of be like, I mean it, but I don't feel like highly emotional about it. Sometimes you say it 100% ironic. I don't mean it at all. And it's really hard to tell the gradient of like how often when somebody's like, this is the problem with Sam Hyde, for example, is he's so
Mhm.
steeped in 80,000 layers of meta irony that at this point nobody ever knows when to take him seriously. I don't think you're quite that level, but what are your tells that you're being sardonic versus not? Like, how do I know when you're being authentic? Especially because like you're not the most like emotionally expressive. While your language is verbose, your facial expressions and whatnot tend to be much more flattened. So it's really hard to use like those other cues to know when is Ian joking? When
I
is he
dr-
being dead serious?
I draw out vowels further when I'm being sarcastic, and I tend to repeat myself and say stuff like, "And I've always said this," or "I famously believe that," things like that. I'm always willing to clarify, and I agree. The Sam Hyde thing is a problem, but Sam Hyde would never clarify. Like if Sam Hyde was being interviewed and he was asked, like, "Okay, well, what really do you believe about the Jews?" He wouldn't sit
Right.
down and just explain all of his, no doubt, genocidal beliefs about them. He would, it would just, he would just, "Oh, what do you mean they're great?" or something. I don't know what he'd say. He's wacky. I'm sure whatever he said would be very funny. um but yeah, no, I do like the sarcasm bit. A lot of it is also kind of an affinity for the irony poisoned, like, shit poster aesthetic, like the Chapo Trap House podcast has been very good about that. If nothing else, they've been good about that. um and I do tend to find it's quite funny, but you always have to be willing to bring down the curtains, because if you can't do that, it's not really just irony. Past a certain point, you're playing defense for views you don't feel you could comfortably defend, and that's a real problem. That's cowardly.
Mm. What makes it cowardly to you?
Well, if you believe something, you should be willing to defend it within reason. If a person really likes the flavor of pineapple on pizza, I don't think you should be drawing pistols over this. But we're talking about politics here. These, especially as public figures, these beliefs have ramifications on people's real lives. Even without, directly affecting policy, we move the minds of potentially millions of people. If you're trying to move them over with some, insincere bullshit that you can't really defend. I mean, obviously, those have got to be pretty shit ideas, right? Especially if you think yourself a commentator. If you're just a comedian, like honestly and sincerely a comedian, I think some leeway can be given because I don't expect everyone to like break out their textbooks when challenged. But
Mhm.
there has to be some leeway there. Like there has to be an expectation we set.
Yeah. Do you personally care much about optics?
I think it's very important how you present an idea. I obviously don't care too much about my own optics because I am what I am, and also I'm constantly shitposting on Twitter and making things worse for myself. So I care about optics as like the practice, like how do you deliver an idea, more so than anything else. And I think that's good too. Not to obfuscate it, but rather like in what ways do you make it as persuasive as possible to the people who need to hear it. A classic
Right.
example of this that keeps up recurring in left discourse has always been, how do you sell anti-racism to like kind of reactionary white people, and one of the classic answers has been through class solidarity, help people recognize that historically racism has been a tool employed by the bourgeois to make white workers resentful of non-white workers through immigration and so on. Therefore, rather than uniting together against the business, they squabble amidst themselves for the pithy wages they're given. Race wars often start over uh, disputes for resources that are majority held by a very small group of people. Um,
Mhm.
and this is an optical consideration. There are different ways of trying to get, more reactionary white populations on board with anti-racism, but that's a good way
Mhm.
of framing it. It's a materialist way of framing it. Stuff like that.
Okay. So, okay, interesting. So we were talking a little while ago about some of your like foundational personal ethics. And I think that this is a good branching point. I wrote down one, which I just pulled back up, which is to never essentialize. What are some of your other like personal guiding ethics?
Oh God. I mean, if we go back to axiomatic values, I don't know how well I could run those through because I feel like nobody can concretely define their own axioms. They can just kind of gesture at a space where they exist. With in
Gesture for me.
gesture, well, I mean, obviously I want people to be happy. I want everyone to be happy, regardless of how much I agree with or disagree with them. The ideal world is in which everyone is happy, hopefully. Um,
Can I ask you why before you go on? Why do you want everyone to be happy?
I guess well-being would be a better word to use than happy. But I think I have kind of an epistemic bias towards consciousness as a value. And if consciousness is a just sort of an evolved decision-making apparatus, and well-being or happiness are the ways in which we're neurotically rewarded for doing things well. I guess my universe is anchored towards that. Like that to me is the good. Like the process by which we make decisions that benefit ourselves and others is the center axle of the clock of the universe, and everything around that, just kind of has to be built outwards. And that's a
Right.
totally arbitrary preference on my part, of course. I could never justify that beyond metaphysical, yeah.
I mean, that's the point of metaphysics is like fundamentally all these like core, this is why you can't describe them well, as you said, there's like most of our like core essential like values break down to more or less like somewhat circular logic or kind of like fifis basically. They're like,
Exactly.
well, I
Exactly.
feel like it would be good if everyone could be happy, right? Which is simple, but true.
Past a point, there's only so much you can do. Nobody's solved
Mhm.
philosophy, thankfully. And I think most people are kind of in that ballpark as well, as in they have a, a, a fundamental bias towards human well-being. They don't
Mhm.
always define well-being in human the way I do, but I think that's just a recurring fact of human nature, is that we seem, by being social animals, we seem to gesture in that direction. And I think that politics is just a system by which we try to maximize that, if any, values. Um,
Right.
So on
happiness, well-being of all people,
much
right?
as you could hope, yeah. I guess beyond the basic don't essentialize, I have a very strong bias towards like freedom as a concept or self-determination, which I'm very fond of. It has to be it's not a, a perfect belief, of course, I don't believe in lawlessness, for example. But stuff like that. I think if you work within a couple of very basic tenets, you can build out a pretty functional ethical and political system.
Yep. So freedom, self-determination. How do you feel about, because a lot of people will also say things like truth or justice. Do you care about any of these like kind of like lofty, again, circular ethical values, or what are your feelings about things like that?
Yeah, well, I think that justice must necessarily be a subset of the well-being, and truth must necessarily be a subset of the freedom. I don't know how any group of people could consider themselves free if they don't know what's going on around them, right? The more truthful the information they're exposed to, the better they have the ability to make decisions. If, all the information they're exposed to is completely controlled or inaccurate, they're not really free. The decisions that they have the ability to make are being chosen for them by the people with the info. So yeah,
Mm.
I would have strong biases towards those things as well.
Interesting. And see, this is the thing that I get caught up on with optics a lot of the time is that optics sometimes feel like you're playing wiggle. You're wiggling around a little bit with the truth, where you're like making, sometimes you wiggle it just a little bit where you make the truth just the most palatable towards somebody. But sometimes you also will abandon some element of truth to make a concept more palatable, to pull them in, right? This would be like the aren't onion argument of essentially you make the outside layer of this ideology the most palatable, but maybe also not the fully true version of where when you get to the center of the onion. That's like the very, very intense dogmatic view of this worldview. Um, which is difficult to navigate.
Oh, 100%. And there's no solution either. There's no way to communicate any ethical or political value in which everything is delivered in the most straightforward fashion possible, because there is no most straightforward fashion. There are always ways of presenting information, and that is always going to prioritize certain types of info over others. And you might not even be aware of the biases you're laying into it. Nobody is an unbiased actor. I think you should make an effort to be as forthcoming and truthful as possible. After all, if you have to like explicitly lie to promote an ideology that cannot possibly be, you know, a strong ideology. But even then, there are exceptions, right? So, like, for example, if say Nazi Germany, right, with the Jews, the Holocaust, it's ramping up, ethically, I think you could say any shit to like a German to get them to not send a Jew to the death camp, right? I'm not a
Right.
Kantian by any sense, right? If you're like, actually Jews when killed explode with poisonous gas, they kill the whole neighborhood. You don't want to shoot them. Please trust me. Like whatever, save as many
Mhm.
people as you can. And I think you can appeal to like a higher order ethical value there. Like, so, okay, so obviously you're not being dishonest for dishonesty's sake. Like the higher value there is preserving life. But it's a constant balance. And I don't think there's a way of like solving that conflict.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting because one thing that makes me think of is like at an interpersonal level, there might be some times to make the most moral decision, you then have to obfuscate truth, right? In the case of like lying about the outcomes of like shooting somebody who's Jewish and saying that it's going to poison your neighborhood.
Yeah, it's
The
just
problem is
some
that
very realistic example there, of course.
yeah, yeah. But, at a societal level, I feel like this is where I get stuck because it's like, well, if you have societal level ideas, I really don't want those ideas. Like, there's nothing more, for example, in my view, that I've experienced, distasteful than trying to argue with somebody about societal level issues, topics, and ideas. And the reality, like the landscapes that each of you are arguing from, appear different. And it means possibly both of you are lying or self deluded or one of you is for sure lying because if I say like this is a plant and then my opponent says what do you mean it's not a plant, right, and they term it something else, now now we can't even go forward with any further idea or battlement, right? So it's like at an interpersonal level there's some element where like full on obfuscation of the truth might be valuable, but at a societal level, especially when it's like these ideas are building the landscape of like how you psychologically engage with the world, how much truth or untruth can be within there before you create, this is what I wonder about with the divisiveness in America is like in many ways when you listen to like very left people or very right people argue, they exist within a landscape that often doesn't seem to exist to anybody else.
No, yeah, for sure. One of the best and easiest to cite examples of like dishonesty on a social level that's justifiable relates to matters of national security. Like in World War II, for example, every government was lying to its own people about a lot of shit, but like you kind of have to. You don't want to lose the war, right? The citizens do not want you to lose the war. It's kind of like an expected, we'll support our government and we'll also accept you not letting us know the exact troop positions at all times. That seems like a fair trade-off. A good
Mhm.
example of kind of like a bit of obfuscation that I might think is justifiable is this. Immigration to the United States does not lower native wages. Asterisk. And the asterisk is that it lowers native wages for only one group, which is to say, high school dropouts in the United States, like poor high school dropouts, get like a very minor wage decrease for a short period of time, but eventually it goes back up due to the extra economic activity of the immigrants, right? If you said broadly, immigration does not lower native wages, you would be like 99.9% correct. That would be like I think, a very responsible statement to make. But it should have, in my opinion, the asterisk. I think it's one of those situations where you should lead with the strong argument, but promote awareness of the caveat, right? Because every
Mhm.
policy comes with a caveat. Nothing is for free. Every road built, every power plant constructed, every dam, there's always something that's going to be lost, something somewhere that's going to be neglected more so than before as a product of the money being moved around. And while you shouldn't like have to dedicate 40 minutes of your argument to addressing all that, because if that was the case,
Mhm.
nothing would ever get done, it should be
Yeah.
accessible. And you should say, if you want more info, look here. I think that's
And
a
you
good
shouldn't
way of
deny
going
it.
by. Yeah, no, you shouldn't lie. You shouldn't lie about it. You just don't have to lead with it. Because again, like if we all handled stuff that way, how would we ever, ever get anything done on like a social level? It'd be impossible.
Right. I'd be curious because it's good to have these like lofty personal ethics, and it's also annoying to have them because it means that we're inevitably going to fail them at certain times, right? There's going to be times, for example, that you say never essentialize, and then you do in an argument or in a topic. Especially, it seems to be the case. The more like emotional and upset we feel about something, the easier it is to kind of fail on some of these like core ethics because a lot of these things like never essentialize sometimes requires us to like take a step back from the actual topic, which is harder to do if the topic is very personally relevant to you as well. When you've noticed, for example, that you've failed on one of your own like personal ethics, what is your typical like course correction or like yeah, what's your typical course correction process?
Well, it's very difficult to reflect on stuff like that in a live stream environment because of the nature of the medium. If you're arguing
Yeah.
with a bunch of people in your chat, it's figuring out anything in that context is difficult. I think I was doing this as a joke, but edgy boy I am. I was making some racist comments about Serbs in a debate that I had recently, about like being naturally evil or something like that, which I didn't believe. It was irony. But it was also maybe a bit over the line because obviously, being ironically racist doesn't mean you're not being racist, of course. So that was probably a bit over the line. I got an email from somebody complaining, and I think a Twitter DM. So that I'll probably try to back off of. Generally speaking, I think it just takes a little bit of reflection. I don't think the audience understands always that they're not necessarily being helpful by constantly trying to sort of, oh, he fucked up when he said this or did this. In large part because if you're a large enough streamer, you're going to hear that all the time about everything that you do.
Yes.
So it's very difficult to in the moment go like, oh well, this one actually did have a good point, because past a point you can't even read all of it. Um, but I think there are a lot of streamers I think who are more prideful than myself. For example, Hassan is allergic to acknowledging that he was wrong on something. I think it might actually kill him. I worry about this. Um, but I think there's a kind of dignity in being able to acknowledge something like this. If you can
Right.
own up to a mistake in a way, you can kind of like lead by example with this, so committed am I to my beliefs that I am willing to admit I did wrong. And if you do it well enough, it makes you look good to admit that you were actually bad. Um, which is just
When
kind of how
you
stuff like
said
this plays out.
yeah, when you said Hassan can admit that he's allergic to admitting that he's wrong, and then you said, "And I worry about this," and then you like smiled slightly and then moved on. Is that an example when you said, "And I worry about this"? Is this like the 50-50 where you're saying it kind of sardonic to like poke fun? Are you also worried about it, or do you not care either
No,
way?
you're right on the 50-50. I do worry about it. I just don't think he's literally biologically allergic. But no, I do worry about that. No. No,
What?
that's the line, but I do worry about it. I'm still the Ukraine war stuff. Um
Yeah,
yeah, there were some takes that were
that
levied
was
there.
yikesy. That's very yikesy.
that I'm concerned about. It's about the process, right? I mean, there are people all over the online left who have had similar bad takes, who I've talked to, and so on. The people in the online left have a very strong bias towards a kind of post-Soviet aesthetic, um, uh, uh, sort of alignment with anti-American states. You know, like
Mhm.
Iran, Syria, North Korea, China, Russia, stuff like that. Um, I don't think that any of Hassan's behavior was motivated by like ethnic hatred of Ukrainians or any of that bullshit. I don't think he's like an authoritarian or anything like that. Like I don't think it was like purposeful behavior, but it's, you know, if you're that steeped in it, you know, you can say some pretty bad stuff. And I just worry about for such a large platform, you can go down a pretty bad road that way.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely can.
Yeah.
Um, oh, it's interesting. Oh, I had a thought. I wrote this down. As you were talking about truth, and I wrote down truth underserves kind of that epistemic value of freedom. And you said that there are times, for example, where you know, especially when it comes to like optics, you can't be as forthcoming as possible. Sometimes there are asterisks, and it's important that you mention that there's an asterisk there. Um, how do you, because as you said, with this is what I keep noticing is there's kind of like this dialectic that's existing within you, right? Where like you prefer the blunt directness, um, and yet you engage in like meta irony a lot of the time, which is inherently antithetical to blunt directness because it makes things confusing, right? You value the like being explicit about what you believe, and you always said obviously said it with the meta irony. I will answer questions explicitly and directly when asked, and yet there's like this optic games where sometimes you don't get to be as forthcoming as possible. There's a caveat that maybe you know you don't deny, but you don't always mention it, or you don't lead with it at first. Does that kind of throw like, is that mindfucky for you at all to kind of balance these 2 things?
I think the only mindfucky thing is being aware of it because it's an inevitable and unavoidable part of human behavior.
Mhm.
If you have a limited amount of time to explain something, you will always leave something out. There is never an end to the amount of things you can say about any subject. And God knows when you're talking political or ethical issues, like, oh my God, yeah, right. People write books and they're insufficient. The books are not enough. Especially in a debate format. Sometimes you get a sentence in before the next guy gets to talk. Like, my God, you know, who could not, in such an environment, leave things out? But it's about the effort made. I don't think there's a gold star to this, right? I don't think there's a way to handle it perfectly. But I think if people have like an earnest intention to, you know, be as truthful as possible within the purview of the medium through which they speak, I think it comes through in what they do. I think the lines are sometimes clearer than one might think based on the complexity of the subject. It's not difficult to go online and see plenty of debates being done by, or essays being written by, or video essays being talked into by people who very clearly are contemptuous of the truth. Not just because they
Mhm.
say things that are objectively like wrong, but also because it's not just a like they won't cite their sources thing. It's like the way in which they structure the content they produce is designed to hold you by the hand, lead you down one road, and like, you know, that's it. There's no like broader analysis or anything. It's just get from A to B, and whatever you believe at the end is just what they wanted you to believe. And they probably aren't particularly honest to you along that way. And there are people who try really hard, you know? Um, Even for people who revel in the ambiguous topics, like say ContraPoints, you know, with some of her videos on social phenomena. There's
Mhm.
always this idea that the subject she's diving into is much bigger than herself, that she's sort of pulling from it what she knows, and she's very self-deprecating in these videos, not just because it fits her personal aesthetic, I think, but also because she's trying to remind the viewer that, you know, hey, this is so much bigger than me. You know, I'm like a little ant talking about this great big topic here. And I think that attitude instills a degree of sort of humility, and it makes the subject more necessarily vague, in a good way, because it means you have to learn more about it. You know, it's
Mhm.
always kind of a warning sign when you're watching a video on a social issue, and it's a very complicated social issue, and somebody comes in with the arrogance and pomp of like a 2014 era Gamergator to explain to you how they've solved it and everyone else is wrong for disagreeing with them. That's a warning sign, right?
Right. Yeah. When you say there's kind of you outlined 2 kind of camps in your answer there, which was people who are contemptuous of the truth versus people who try. Where along the line are you? Like, do you because I would imagine that's a spectrum, like most things in this world. Where do you feel like you fall in that spectrum of people who try versus people contemptuous of the truth?
I think well, obviously, I would feel that I lean more towards people who try, but I don't think I'm as far along as some people that I know. For
Okay.
example, Soaked on Left and I would say Soaked on Left, Loner Box, Jangles, a lot of more the more empirical the subject, I think the easier it is to be like a very like direct and overtly truthful person because you're in empirics, there's more that you can rely on to be basically objectively true. People like that, where they're just like vomiting sources every time they talk about anything. I have a lot of respect for people like that. I don't think
Mm,
that what they're doing is necessarily as persuasive always as the more upfront or direct stuff, in large part because that is the trade-off, right? The most truthful delivery mechanism for information will be like the textbook. It will be like the very measured, very like uninvolved resource booklet on the issue. But nobody ever prevented a war by handing out to the fascists the textbook on how not to be racist, right? It's just not
mm.
it's not the end of the equation. But I think it's important that everyone along the line, no matter how personally committed they are to being like that, should point people down that way. It's an ideal to strive towards, you know?
Right. Well, it's interesting, right? Because like this is, for example, when I talk with academics, this is a really big struggle that they have is they like can't really get into the space. They don't really get a lot of traction. And the first thing they'll say to me is like, why don't people want to listen to me? And I'm like, honestly, you're boring. Like it's boring to listen to you. It's not interesting. You like have 17 asterisks to everything that you say, which points to me of like people like narratives, right? Like people, the best speakers typically can take a collection of messy data and they can build together not just like a semblance of form where you can recognize and kind of map on to being like, oh, okay, that's a square. It makes sense. But they create like a story and a landscape around it. Right. They build this narrative so that as the viewer, as the listener, you can like sit within it and you can fully understand the complexity of these ideas. This is why, for example, like childhood stories are both simple and inanely deep, where it's a fractal. You can't finish talking about the Lion King because there's so many extra layers of complexity of what it's communicating. And a 4-year-old can understand it at the same time. They can understand some of the fundamental principles about like bravery and responsibility and stuff like that.
Exactly. And you take a look at great like pieces of political literature, right? And I'll use ones more from my side, out of bias, but like The Great Dictator, right, with Charlie Chaplin. Can you
Mhm.
can you learn from this a perfect and unimpeachable understanding of the economic and sociopolitical circumstances leading to fascism? No, of course not. But you get a strong message from it. And at the end of the day, with the values you're looking to maximize, no matter how much you may personally value truth, the fascist does not. So if the fascist wins, your abstemiousness was for naught, right? If you commit yourself to being the most fastidious, forget charisma, forget optics, we're delving into the textbooks here, and that's the extent to which you engage in political action, and then you lose and the fascists take over, well, then what was it all for, right? At the end of the
Mhm.
day, we're always in wartime. We're always fighting for something, aren't we? There's always some value, some political gain, and the stakes are always high. Tens of thousands of people die in the United States every single year, hundreds of thousands of people, due to lacking policy with regards to our medical system, our healthcare, our insurance policies, our housing policies, you know? There's always something worth fighting over. And
What are
it's
you fighting for?
Oh, I mean, I care about all these issues. Right now, I'm most concerned with the rise of fascism in the United States, but I think, there's always something. It's a fractal. There are always things to care about. There are genocides happening the world all over right now. There's the oppression of the Uyghur Muslim people in the Xinjiang province, which has dialed down in the past few years, but has not gone away. There is the invasion of Ukraine. There's the revolutionary activity in Iran. There are the people without power or water, thanks to our policies in Puerto Rico, millions of American citizens who are living in shanty towns with nothing to drink. There's that. Speaking of nothing to drink, what was that city here in the United States, Jacksonville, in which they also do not have potable water? They were pouring sludge from their sink. What was that? Was that Jacksonville? I forget. There's always something, but it all
Mm.
comes down to basic political values. Where does the money go? Who do we care about? How much has stuff like nationalism, racism, um, capitalist austerity affected these issues? The answer is overwhelmingly. So You stay fixated on them and you do the good you can, and you present these ideas convincingly, because if you don't, people might die. People are dying. More people might die. And in so doing, if your values are good, it is to your benefit to be as truthful as possible, because obviously it strengthens your argument.
Right. And I think the interesting when you say like people are dying, I feel like the caveat there that's important. I could be wrong. And so tell me if I'm trying to read through the lines, and so I might be misreading you. But what I'm hearing is there's always something to fight for. And when you're saying something like people are dying, what I think I'm hearing is people are not having well-being, right? Because the death in and of like people, of course people are dying, right? This would be the dismissive. Of course people are dying. People will always die. Death is natural, right? But the issue is, are they dying well? Is there well-being in their life? Or was their death mostly rendered through meaningless suffering, and they experienced largely dominantly meaningless suffering throughout their entire lives? Am I understanding you
No,
correctly
no, no,
when I'm
you're correct. That's the asterisk, right? Of course, we don't have the immortality protocol just yet. God willing, we will get there one day. But no, they are dying quite needlessly. We're only everyone dying in Puerto Rico right now able to die at like 93, from liver failure. Unfortunately, that's just not the situation they're in. Well, not all of them. I'm sure there are still Puerto Ricans who die at 93 from liver failure, but probably not all of them.
right.
The stakes are always high. It has always been a delusion, I think, predominantly of the West, that the world is more or less settled, like the pieces have fallen into place, and things are still now. We lived through the 1990s here in the United States. We, of course, are invulnerable, immune to attack from our neighbors. So, but this is just not the case, right? I mean, it was only in 1999 that Serbia invaded Kosovo and displaced 1.4 million people. The Rwandan genocide was right around
Mhm.
then. The end to apartheid in South Africa. The world is always broiling, and with climate change, it's only going to get worse. It's important people take active attitudes towards these issues, and I hope the people on my side, and I think they've been good about this for the most part, but I hope they will continue to be fastidious and truthful, because once you get into the territory of, well, my ideology is best in the end, so what I have to do to get there is entirely irrelevant. You
Mhm.
get kind of like the Stalinist attitude towards the revolution, where literally any like blood-soaked staircase that leads up to the top is justifiable, and then you find out that the staircase is leading down, actually. It's you're leading quite a bit away from socialism. And nobody knew that because information was so restricted.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, that quote you said, we're always fighting for something." When I hear that, I think of as I've gotten more into the space, I'm Canadian, by the way, just so you have an understanding of kind of some of the cultural differences. And as a result, I've been reading a lot more of like political theory to understand American politics, because while Canadians are essentially American politics, but we LARP that we're like way nicer. And then we have a lot more like certain like socialist policies, obviously like universal
Hmm.
healthcare and stuff like that. Culturally, we're pretty similar in most ways. Like all of our media is shared. There is very little Canadian peer media. But one thing that I noticed that's really different about Canadian to American politics specifically is in American politics, I could be wrong, but what I've read from the literature is that it's kind of bred and spoken into most American children that you have to fight for what you believe. Whereas in like Canadian politics, there's a lot more of like the gusto of essentially I must fight isn't there as much. Like there's obviously like we should advocate for what we want, but it feels like Canadians view it as like we got to negotiate, got to find a compromise that works the best for the most people as possible, whereas the Americans have like this fight. And it makes sense based on the nascence of your guys' country as well. Um but it's
We are an
interesting.
aggressive people.
You are, and it's interesting because sometimes there's like this Buddhist mantra which would be like an elevation of essentially like, of course, there's always something to fight for, but if you're always fighting for something, then you're never getting to experience peace. And like, there's this argument of essentially peace is created, not found. I'd be curious about your thoughts on this because in many ways, it's if you're always fighting for something, you can also always find a fight.
Oh, that's 100% true. I just don't think we're ever really going to reach a point where there isn't a fight to be had. I think life is lived for conflict, and this is the single respect in which the fascists are completely correct. Because everything you choose to make a fight now is something for which, if resolved, another group of people could live for peace. The Civil Rights Act here in America was something that took quite a bit of fighting for, but the black people in this country, before its passage, could not live under even a semblance of peace. It was through the choice to make it a fight that there was even a chance at peace. But of course, even then, that's a lie, because there was a fight afterwards. What about redlining? What about the treatment of black people by the police, you know? I don't think there will ever be an end to it. I don't think we get peace. I think peace, at least the illusion of peace, is something we're told exists because it placates us and it makes us sort of more passive, more permissive. You know, in a Marxian sense, you could say that the illusion of peace is something sold to us so that we can focus on things like commodity acquisition and material possessions and not question instilled social orders like that of the bourgeois or of white supremacy or something like that, you know? And I think I'm largely sympathetic to that idea because I'll tell you a
Mhm.
group of people who have never known peace, the ultra wealthy. The ultra wealthy, to a man, are all highly politically involved. They hire analysts and investors and advisors whose job it is to allocate their money appropriately, oftentimes towards causes that will deny workers the right to do this, that, the other, you know, anti-labor causes. And the way their businesses are structured reifies their class interest. Even if they personally don't do anything, they're like a queen bee or like a black hole, and around which, you know, orbits this aura of class awareness that they inflict upon others. And we don't, you know, they won't stop, right? They've never stopped. The powerful are always consolidating their interests. But by choosing to not involve ourselves, we do make their job a lot easier.
Interesting. It's an interesting. I keep using this word with you. Good thing you love verbose words. I can just bust all of my vocab out. I'm not that my vocab is nearly as impressive as yours,
I've probably misused a
but
few, don't worry.
me too. That's the key to being verbose. Is as long as you say words complicated enough, no one will ever find out that you don't know what they mean.
Confidence.
I keep noticing kind of a dialectic within you. Maybe it's a paradox instead. I haven't decided whether it's like a, I'm sure you understand what I mean, but for the dialectic, it's like two kind of things that appear mutually exclusive, kind of somehow synthesizing into like a better, usually richer, fuller understanding of something, or a paradox where they're just mutually exclusive and they can't really be held true together, which is always fighting for something. And then you said, and I just want people to be happy. So maybe this is a projection on my heart because my greatest desire in the world is I also just want people to be happy. And I think happiness is really, really, really simple, actually. And it must be found in the simple because things are too infinitely complex to find it in complexity. Um, how do you balance the I must always be fighting for something and also I want people to just be happy?
Well, I think there's happy to be found in fighting for the right causes. For example, you know, a lot of people in my community have found friends or have had, you know, personally fulfilling times canvassing or phone banking or text banking, stuff like that, which, you know, is a fight of a kind, of course, you know, the cause they're pushing for. I don't think that it's fighting is necessarily something which brings about unhappiness. I do think, however, that like when it comes to our well-being, we kind of have like an internal balancing mechanism, right? Like you take me out of an air-conditioned room into a hot, like sunny day today, and I'll be unhappy, sure. But like, were humans in tribal societies who lived in hot areas always miserable? No, obviously not. They simply learned to live with it. And there are things that I
Mhm.
have to deal with, like microplastics in my food, that they didn't have to deal with. I think we have sort of a rebalancing towards the norm, and there are only a couple of things that like really pull us from that, like sort of species being attributes. We need shelter, food, water, we need love, we need social attainment. You know, those things are fundamental. I don't think you can rebalance your way out of that. Um, Certainly not for long. And in that sense, the first step is, are there people who do not have these things? Social fulfillment, food, water, shelter, etc. Yes, billions of them, actually. Um,
Mhm.
so there's something to fight for in a very direct sense there. But even if all of that were satiated and everyone could live what is considered a middle class Western life, I still think there's something sort of existentially fulfilling about believing things could be better and working to make it so. I think that it's almost like, well, this really is the Marxian species being. If we are a civilization building species, then we must necessarily be that, even when the civilization has already been constructed. Our desire to
Mhm.
build does not end when all the roads have been paved, no? So maybe that's done. But 100 years from now, will we be truly equal? Probably not. There will still be social issues. There will be things that
Right.
can be fixed. And I hope people keep working towards that. Even if it's exhausting, I think it's better that we care than that we not.
What do you what is an example of something that just makes you like happy in a simple way? And so to clarify what I mean by that, I'll give you an example for myself. So I realized at the ripe age of 27 that there was a really big difference between having a meaningful life and having a happy life. And I realized I was really fucking good at having a meaningful life. I was very successful in my career, a very high GPA, was doing some of the foremost research in my province. Just academically and career wise, very, very successful. And I was fucking unhappy. I wasn't miserable, but I was unhappy. And more importantly, I was never content and I couldn't be content. And so I've spent the last like year and a half trying to figure out how to just be content while still pursuing meaning. And I've realized that I have dreams, which are connected to career and all sorts of like lofty, meaningful things. But what I really want when it comes to happiness is I really want to come home and have somebody I love greet me, and usually a dog as well. It'd be nice if there's a dog there as well, wagging its tail that I can just say hi to. I really want to fall asleep at night with my dog, with her little head on my chest, and my husband beside me. And I really love waking up to the exact same experience. And that's what makes me really, really happy. And it's simple. It's just a dog and a husband, and in many ways they're kind of replaceable. Like I could find that regardless of whether I have all this meaning and stuff. What makes you happy in like a simple way?
Long conversations with friends, I suppose. That's the main thing. That's the
Yeah.
predominant interest on my part. Whether it's a romantic partner or not is immaterial. If they're a friend and I'm having a long conversation, I'm usually quite happy. But I think in a broader sense, it's really just about wanting to do something and then doing it. I think we live very long-term lives now. When we were out there fucking under canopy leaves and cracking open coconuts with rocks to drink the water inside, we planned out what, a week? Our planning did not go very far. Plan for winter, whatever. But nowadays it's all, what do you do after school? What do you do with this? Retirement, save for this, that. But I think there's a lot of value lost in the simple pleasure of simply wanting to do something and then doing it with all the restraint and self-control of a dog or a child. If you wake up and you want to do a thing, you can just do that thing. If you want to go outside for 2 minutes and then walk back in, you can just do that thing. I think people have like this innate, maybe it's not innate. They have like this aversion, I think, to, because they have a plan, right? Everyone has a plan.
Mm.
There's a thing, there's a set of things they need to do that day. And I think they stick to it sometimes with so much tenacity that they forget that they're going to end up spending like 3 hours today staring at their phone anyway. You could just take a tiny bit of that time and just do the exact thing you want to do at that moment. Be fully impulsive. Don't hurt yourself or other people, of course, obviously, but the impulsiveness, I think it's an innate part of how we're supposed to be acting, and I think it's kind of discouraged, maybe socially. I don't know if that's a
Mhm.
universal thing, or maybe if it's more so the case here or more so the case in other places, but I think it's good to be able to be impulsive.
Yeah, I agree. Um, yeah, that's super interesting.
And then
Talking
and then
long
you
conversations with friends. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when if you live that way for long enough, I think you become more cognizant of the things that you consistently want. If the immediate
Mhm.
impulse is, oh, I wish I had so and so titty to squeeze, then you have to find someone who has titties to live with. Or if you want to have a conversation with a friend, you have to spend time with a friend. But if you're aware of those impulsive needs and you can chain them together, that's a whole life, sort of
Right.
extrapolated from the moment to moment impulses that you have. And it's good to
Exactly.
live like that.
Yeah, I spend like 90% of my life thinking about my dog and wanting to pet her. Probably worth like getting a dog and then learning the necessary steps to caretake my dog, to make sure that she's healthy, make sure that she's trained enough so that she's a good dog and makes my life not miserable. Same with like, the simpleness of what I said of I want my husband beside me. Well, having a husband is a very complex thing. Maintaining a husband is an even more complex thing, right? It takes many, many, many steps of daily work to maintain that my husband wants to be beside me when I wake up in the morning and that I want to be beside him when I wake up as well.
But it's worth working for.
It is. Yeah. So I want to ask you some of the elephants in the room that I think everyone really wants to know.
Hit me up.
Um, where to start? You've mentioned you've mentioned a bunch of content creators, and I'm going to be honest. I actually didn't realize that you had an autism diagnosis. And as soon as you said that, I was like, okay, that makes our communication make way more sense to me now. Like I know how to do this because I've lived and existed with my dad, right? Not that every autistic person is the same, but he's very similar to you and like very direct. If he says like this thing is shitty, he means that it's shitty. He doesn't mean that it's morally shitty necessarily. Um, which is refreshing in many ways.
And we're all very cool and handsome, of course.
True. Well, he's balding, so he's dropping down on the handsome thing.
I
You got a
respect
good head
balding
of hair,
men.
actually. I'm
I'm never going
impressed.
to lose my hair. Every male in my family like dies with a full head of hair. I'm immune, so I'll keep that for a long
Damn,
while going.
some solid genes. Don't let the white ethno nationalists hear that.
No, exactly.
Um,
That's the ground upon which I critique them. You know, it's my phenotypical superiority.
True. Yes, truly. Good hair, good head of beard. Very, very impressive.
Mm.
Talk to me about your relationship with Destiny or Steven.
That's a girl's name. No.
That is a
Um,
girl's name.
I watched him way back when. Like, I must have been 17 or something when I started watching him. I mean, before he did politics or anything, it was just StarCraft back then. And I liked StarCraft a lot too, so that helped. Um, but anyway, I mean, obviously, you know, it'd be kind of silly of me to pretend that, you know, I would have gotten into the streaming were I not a fan of his. Because obviously, if you're a fan of a live streamer long enough, you'll think, oh, well, hell, that looks fun. Um,
Right.
when I started streaming too, you know, it was crossovers from his community that were, you know, visiting and donating and such early on, which was what sort of prompted me to take it more seriously and eventually ramp up and get a community of my own. So, yeah, no, it was the bedrock upon which the fortress got built.
Right. Um, how integral would you say that Stephen and your because you guys were, from my understanding, good friends as well. Like as you were growing as a streamer, you guys interacted a lot. It seems like you guys kind of mutually shared platforms, collaborated. I don't know. In my experience, just to make sure your audience is fully aware if they've never seen me before, I'm very much like in that sphere right now. Stephen is absolutely supporting my career. I would say dominantly owe my career to him at this point. And it's kind of growing with my own work as well. How much of that was true for you? And I'm saying that so that your audience is aware in case they're like worrying that I'm like trying to hide that and
But
not
the
show my cards or something
No,
like
I
that.
get you. I get you. The Destiny's Jobs program was still well in effect when my career kicked off, but we really weren't friends. I know this is turned into some kind of like back and forth like contention or whatever. But we never really talked that much. I think the extent of our interactions were it began when he was streaming on some Gamergate related Anita Sarkeesian feminism thing. I think he was talking about like the definition of feminism as used by a subreddit called Shit Reddit Says, which used to be a very relevant feminist Gamergate era subreddit. It was a while back. Anyway,
Yeah.
his Skype handle was public, so I spam messaged him a bunch and argued with him for about it. And I must have sounded awfully nasally back then. Because
Why?
well, I was just so young. My voice deepened a
Oh,
lot like past puberty finishing. And I argued with him a good bit past that point. But we didn't really like talk interpersonally. I think he DM'd me one time to wish me a happy birthday in the like 6 or 7 years. But apart from that, it wasn't really friends so much as me admiring his platform and his debate talent. Um, which of course he obviously has an affinity for. Um, and of course I'd be annoying in his chat and the like. And he banned me from his chat a couple of times too, because I was a big feminist way back when. So I was annoying in his chat to the point where his own mods would ban me just for being there. But one of his mods was more sympathetic to me, so wrote some code to get me auto unbanned whenever they would ban me. Like I would say something pro-feminist, and then they'd ban me, and then I'd like pop right back up, and they didn't have like the admin code or whatever, so I would just sort of be there, invulnerable. And then I think past a point I annoyed the hell out of Destiny and he banned me. And of course I just got immediately unbanned because he just used the regular ban feature on me. And he got
mhm.
increasingly angry on stream as he banned me like dozens of times in a minute. Before like finally eventually he realized what was going on and did the admin too. I think I might have just left actually because past a point it was like I was just sort of standing there invulnerably while he was like smashing the keyboard or something. I have no. This happened so long ago. That's how I remember it happening though. But and that and you know and then I popped back up and left again, then popped back up. So I've just been kind of like living in the walls of the DGG community for a good while until like 2019.
Okay. So in your view, did he like help promote your career at all, or was it more like your own self work within his space?
Well, a lot of it was just the convenience of having people in his community who already knew me. So even if he never did or said a thing, like it still would have been his platform that allowed for my platform to kick off, you know? I don't think he
Mm.
he might have a couple of times. I don't know if he promoted me so much as like I was considered like a favored chatter of the stream. So there might have been a couple of times where it was like, oh yeah, you know, he's over there doing his own thing. I don't think there was like any collaboration, but I could misremember that. There might be stuff I don't remember there.
That's fair. So you would have never considered him like your personal friend or anything. So when people talk about like the burning of the bridge or the fall, like the fallout part of the relationship, it sounds like the conception of the public at least is that there was some level of like kinship and friendship, and that is now over. Would you say that that's a correct narrative, or would you disagree with that on your side?
No, I think that was deliberately dishonest on Destiny's part. I don't think he considered me a friend. I know I didn't him. I considered him like a content creator that I respected, you know? And there was definitely like a parasocial thing there. Like I watched him for like a decade, of course, you know? But for me, like from my side of things, when we fell out, to me it felt like the parasociality was on my part. Like from my perspective, it was me liking him less, and that meant something to me. And it felt like but it didn't feel like a two-way thing, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't have made sense for him to go, "Oh, I've disappointed you. Haha, how dare you feel that way?" It didn't feel like there was a justification for some kind of mutual sense of betrayal there. Um but I don't know. It was the messiest and most protracted series of disagreements I've ever had on this blighted platform. You know, for most people that I argue with or disagree with, it's usually pretty straightforward, but I think he kind of revels in disagreeing with me, which turns it into this interminable process, you know? Which is why I mostly don't engage with him no more.
Mm. So you don't think by any chance like he was just like hurt or something like that?
It's totally possible. I don't want to like discount that. I just
Yeah.
remember a couple of specific times when the ways that he was talking about like trying to argue or prove that we were friends or whatever, that felt kind of weird to me. Like we never chatted or anything. I don't know how you can be friends with someone without casually chatting, especially if you've been each other GMs for years, you know? That's just seems like kind of an odd definition of friend to me. Um but again, I was never really gunning to be the man's friend. I liked his you know, his streaming. You know, I liked him as a professional. I respected him. So that was more the nature of the relationship to me.
Mm. Okay. So when kind of all that fallout happened, I believe in my understanding it was about like the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff and your girlfriend and like a head mod made a clip of him or something like that. Was that what initiated the fallout on, at least as far as you understand it?
I don't even I know that was a big part of it. I don't even remember. I think it was like I had a roommate who reposted a clip who isn't a mod but reposted a clip on Twitter, and during a live stream chat my partner at the time said that some of the stuff Destiny was saying was TOS, which it ended up being because he got banned for it, or like that he should be banned for it or something. I think that was, I don't know. That thing got blown out into such a gigantic like crybaby kind of deal or whatever. There was a lot of wacky behavior going on there. I'll tell you what. Um, I wish I remembered all of it though. See, kind of a problem here is that again, if I remember the reasons why I don't get along with any other online creator, there's usually like one or two or three events that I can kind of nail it down to. But the Destiny thing was like this years long, like everything blown up and like here have a debate on a debate on a debate on a debate on a this issue turns into this issue, and do we argue over whether or not these two people talking about the recollection of this event? I don't have the memory for this. I genuinely don't. I remember things being genuinely pretty wacky back then though.
Okay. So is someone you see somebody that at the beginning we talked about like there's certain people that you don't want to engage in with anymore because it's kind of like a black tar pit. Does Steven now fall into that category
Oh,
for you? Of somebody you just don't want to interact with?
he's the blackest tar pit by far. Um, He's because he really revels like it to a weird extent in the disagreement. Like not even necessarily in the disagreement. It's the what would the right term be? I don't know, man. It just feels kind of emotional for him. I don't know. He's got his own things going on. I don't know. Wacky guy. There are a couple other people like that though. I don't really like the MAGA communism people either. Um because
Like super, super communist people, like tankies, or
no, like the tanky girl, because I think they're fascists, like Haas or Hinkle or whatever. Because I think their issue is that for them, the arguing online is just theater for them. It's only optics with no content underneath it. There's no stakes to the debate, right? See, to my mind, like a good proper conversation with people that I disagree with, there has to be like a lose condition for both sides, right? Like if you showed up to a convo with me and proved everything I said wrong, I would look pretty bad to my audience, right? I've cultivated a community where they expect me to show that I'm right. But I've had conversations with people where they'll just say like anything,
Mhm.
no matter how empirically wrong, you know. And you can just say like that is empirically wrong, like that is very, very silly, you know. Um,
Right.
and it won't matter. And then they'll just say another thing, you know? And then if you do that like 50 times in a row, it becomes really, really clear that they're there for your attention. Like they're there for the theater of the engagement, you know? There's not a lose condition for them. They can't lose. It would be like a presidential debate where like one person you bring up is like a 12-year-old who's like Fortnite dancing or something. They can't lose that debate because there were a 12-year-old Fortnite dancing right next to a prospective president. Like there's no way they come off looking bad there. They can only denigrate the, you know, the value of the platform. You get what I mean?
Right, so they're like reveling in the conflict in and of itself, so that there isn't a lose condition, because as long as like conflict is going on between you and them, they're winning essentially, because it's not about the ideas or the proof of facts or anything like that. It's just about establishing a conflict in the first place.
Exactly, exactly. Yes, that's really frustrating for me. That like that isn't just like that's frustrating for me in a way that I don't really have like a sarcastic comment to own up to it with. You know what I mean? Like if I'm in a position like that where I'm talking to somebody like that, I'm genuinely annoyed and it's difficult for me to sort of roll that off with like a collection of insults to denigrate them. Because how do you denigrate somebody who's in that position? They're just like it's like trying to make fun of a pig for rolling in its own shit, right? You're not going to hurt the pig's feelings, you know. You're just sort of watching it, and you have to smell it because you're right next to the pig, you know. That's
Mm.
very
So in your
frustrating to me.
view, you'd rather just walk away than not smell the pig.
Yeah, yeah, that because that's the only, yeah, that's all you can really do, right? I've seen some
Mhm.
debates with those folks, like Hinkle and Haas and stuff. I don't know if there's a mechanism by which they can lose a debate for the same reason that I don't think you could technically win a debate against a whoopee cushion that somebody is like punching into the ground, you know? I don't know,
Right.
like how do you just have to listen to the fart noise. So you try to like talk over it. The degradation of trying to outshout a whoopee cushion being punched into the ground. It's humiliating.
Interesting. And so when you're describing this tar pit, you've said Hawes and Henkel. Would you then kind of put like Stephen in there as well, as somebody who just like revels in the argument and the fight, um, and there isn't much substance. There isn't a metric by which they can be wrong or lose, because the fight is the point.
Oh, he does the same thing, but for totally different reasons. The Hinkle Haas people do it because they're fascists and they're just promoting fascism disingenuously. For Destiny, I think it's like an emotional thing where he is like very contemptuous towards some people, and the interminable like engagement is just a vehicle through which he gets to satiate this kind of like fixation with feeling more intelligent than them or like controlling them in some fashion. That's my guess though. That's just like a guess. He's made like a pretty big like he's made his interest in me a very emotional thing, but I don't know his emotions, right? So I can only like kind of speculate, right? For Hinkle and Haas, it's pretty straightforward. In their case, it's just very obviously like a political grift.
Right. It seems potentially it's like more interpersonal, which is interesting. When you get into interpersonal conflicts with other people, how do you? Because again, I think a lot of people when they watch you, they're going to feel like you're very affectively flat. And so, do you ever? I don't know much about your lore. Do people ever like try to call you things like sociopath or anything like that because you're very like affectively flat?
No, I don't think so. I think in most of my interpersonal actions, I tend to be pretty nice to folks, I think, and I think that dissuades a lot of it. I mean, I get called cringe and autistic pretty often, but I'll own up to those things. I'll take
Right.
those, I'll pin those medals right on my chest. Um, so I'm fine by that. No, I don't get that call that often though. I get called a lot of stuff like a fascist or a horse lover or whatever. The sociopath thing doesn't come up too often. I think I think I give people the impression that regardless of what I do believe something, you know? The way I act doesn't really make sense if I'm just kind of emptily like recycling the motions that I've seen other people do. So I think I
Right.
avoid that criticism for the most part.
Okay, yeah. And just for those of you who are, like to read into implications, I was not implying that Ian is a sociopath. I just
I
know
didn't
that
think
that's
that.
a common. I know you didn't, but I also know how neurotypicals like to think. Um,
Goddamn
so
neurotypicals.
I know they just read into everything. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, because one thing that I find most interesting about you is like reading your affect specifically when you're like talking about things. What do you think are things that like get you really like worked up and like expressive? Because I've watched your content now, a fair bit of it, and there are definitely moments where I've seen you in debates and stuff where like you are very heated, you're very animated. Like, what brings that out of you typically?
I try to stay calm when I debate because you're always better at debating when you're calm. But there are a
Mhm.
couple of things that will always get me worked up. I hate it when this is one of the reasons I don't like moderated debates. I really hate it when like you'll ask a simple direct question to somebody who's clearly lying and then they'll do this like 3-minute tangent that had nothing to do with what you said, you know? Cuz at the end of it you can just ask like the same question over again. You can try to hold them to it, but without interrupting them, they get so much time to narrativize, and it's very, very frustrating. It's one of the reasons why I don't care that much about like civility in the context of debates, because I've had debates with people who I clearly like don't like and disagree with a ton, where I've still been very, very civil. The lack of civility usually comes, I think, from a type of like an attempt to abuse sort of the limitations of the debate format to weaponize them in a way to obfuscate the truth or like belt out a point. That always gets me. I don't like that. I don't like it when I feel like people are just sort of enjoying being on the channel for its own sake. Like, again, the reveling in conflict for conflict's sake. Um,
Mhm.
I think that's really frustrating because at that point, like, especially since it's if you just like hang up with them, it's, oh, why'd you hang up? You had no rebuttal to their like 87 obviously incorrect positions. You proved the first 86 things you said wrong, but that 87th one held you to account, didn't it? That's really frustrating too. I have gotten calmer with time. I think, oh, maybe not recognizing like hypocrisy in one's own beliefs when they are being sincere, like if people don't seem to realize what it is they're doing. I've had convos with some lefties who basically just like repeated ethno-nationalist arguments to me, unironically. And yeah, like you're talking about that with them and they don't get it can be really, really irritating. Ooh, yeah, I'm getting
Right.
agitated just thinking about it. Oh my God, there's so many annoying people out there.
Yeah, especially I think on the internet space. Um, Speaking of like tensions and stuff, I think Cat Black was the biggest recent drama that you had. Was the Cat Black drama, was that before the Fortress arc started, or where was that in kind of the chronology
I
of
think that
your
made the
career?
Fortress arc happen. I think that was what created it.
Okay.
Um, yeah, that was the frustrating thing about that is that, and this not often will I say this, but I think I was like completely objectively correct on this one socially. I think everyone around me just sort of crumbled to dust on this one. It's very I say standing in the pit where no one likes me in the online left, haha, look at the rest of you, so incorrect you are from their ivory towers. But like, oh God, that one was really bad. Do you want me to run through it?
Sure. Yeah, just for those who maybe don't know what it is.
Yeah, okay, so basically the gist of it is that I said some, like, random, like, mildly sexist thing about J.K. Rowling some time ago. I said something
It's like
like,
women sit down and be quiet or
yeah,
something
"Women
like
shut
that.
up," or something, 'cause I said some comment about how, like, she's tarnished her legacy, by, being a transphobe or whatever, like 2nd grade, like CS:GO lobby tier sexism, whatever. Anyway, she quote tweeted that, or no, she screenshotted that, and then she made a big thing of it, and then I made fun of her in her comments, and news articles were written, and people made, it was a whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Um, a little while after, Cat Black did a big Twitter thread, and she does big Twitter threads. That's what she does. She does giant Twitter threads, just her preferred method of communication. About how, I'm not going to name any names, but how do people feel about male allies weaponizing sexism to defend trans people? It was about me. And I had previously actually had an okay discourse with Cat Black in the past, so I DM'd her. And it was like late one night, and I was thinking maybe I can salvage one relationship, in the online left. And I was trying to explain to her how, like, it's not about the sexism in the original message that I made on Twitter, the original tweet. It's kind of weird to me how the follow-up to that was like, J.K. Rowling was in shambles. Like, I was making fun of her, articles were getting written, and for a lot of online lefties, like, the lesson they took from this was that I enabled transphobia because TERFs are transphobes because cis men say sexist things. Like, there was the message was totally off. And again, like, this is so in the weeds. Like, I could spend an hour, but to be very simplistic, I tried to like indicate to her, like, it's not about like the sexism, it's about like the attitude after the fact, like, what do you focus on after? And she was like a huge bitch to me in DMs, like massive bitch. But I, arrogantly assuming that with my giant brain, my wrinkly brain, I could convince her anyway, despite her being a giant bitch. I like talked with her for like 40 minutes, and she was essentially just like calling me like, white boy, I'm not going to listen to you, how dare you, so on, so on. You know how unproductive this gets. At the end of all of that, I go to bed. The next day, she types up like a 1 billion tweet thread, including all the logs between herself and me that she leaked, where she looked like an asshole. And I was like earnestly trying to explain to her, like ignoring her insults, and like a whole thing. And then there was this protracted Twitter thing. And then like she leaked that we used to sex with each other. And it was like this whole fucking thing, and it was like hundreds of tweets. And then a manifesto was written afterwards and whole. So anyway, my ending theory here is that she's obsessed with me and haters stay mad. And that was fucking crazy. And that 99% of online drama is like psychosis manifesting through political language. Whew.
Mm.
I think I got like 5% of that drama. That shit was wild. That went on like for a while.
ContraPoints got involved in this,
Yes.
correct?
She's friends with Cat Black. So Contra came in there and hypocritically did the exact thing that people did to her, which like drove her into like opium abuse, which she's admitted to. That's not a leak or whatever. Which is like she essentially walked in and said like, well, how dare you disagree with Cat Black when you're like a white man and cisgender, That's essentially what she said. And that's what other people said to her, because other people were like, how ContraPoints, how could you, binary cis person, or not cis, trans person, speak over us.
What people's issues, yeah.
Yeah, speak over us, non-binary, whatever. Like, it's the infinite, like, oppression Olympics, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, she stepped in, she said some dumb shit. I disagreed with her, I DM'd her, and then she blocked me, and that's been the end of it.
Okay, so those bridges have all been burnt firmly.
Yeah, probably pretty irreparably, which sucks. I don't think Cat Black's content has any value at all. Contra's obviously does, so I still encourage people in my audience to watch her. Lord knows I do.
Okay. Does that one bother you then, the Contra one, because you respect her so much?
Yeah, that one really sucked. Normally pretty resilient to this stuff because it happens so much, but yeah, that one was pretty bad. I don't regret how it turned out, because I think the way it ended up was kind of an authentic representation of my values, like, I was principled, I didn't back down, I'll never back down because I'm friends with somebody. I've never done that in my life. So I'm happy that I did that. I guess I would rather be the me that I am in this situation than be like the person who compromised and like lied to save a friendship. I'm happy I'm here, but damn, it still really sucked. The problem is, like, she's so obviously wrong on this. It's hypocritical. She's made videos where she denounces the behavior she engaged in. She admitted in the tweet interactions that we'd had that she did not read the messages between myself and Cat Black, which means she literally did not know what my argument was. So she couldn't have even had a mechanism by which she could critique me. She didn't even know what I believed. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's pretty unfortunate.
Were you friends with Contra before this?
I wouldn't say we were friends, but we talked like over text a couple of times, and been generally like friendly whenever she'd come on. I
Okay.
wouldn't say
So you'd
friends
like
though.
collabed and stuff, and it was always like a positive rapport.
Yes, yes, but it wasn't like we were
Yeah.
like super chatty in the background or whatever. I've
Yeah.
only got a couple of content creators who I engage with extensively off platform.
Yeah. Okay, so the Contra one sucked. Did it suck specifically because you just respect her so much and it's kind of lost that venue for you to like interact with her and you still to this day respect her content essentially?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the quality of the content, I think. I will admit that I don't think her most recent video was as good as some of her previous, but I just think that's the natural variance of content production. I don't think that's like a causative factor. Um, it is unfortunate because I respected her, and I always went up to bat for her too. I spent my whole career, being a pretty active, I guess, defender of her, which isn't transactional. It doesn't mean she has to defend me or anything like that. Um,
Hmm.
but I do think it indicates kind of a different level of charitability on either side, like the willingness for us to like sit back for a second and go like, oh, okay, maybe there's some value here, and not just like instantly trash another person. um
Yeah,
so yeah, it's pretty unfortunate, but the nice thing is that there are only so many bridges that you can burn, right? Eventually you do run out of people to have a falling out
that's
with.
true. And then you have an island.
Exactly. I'm known for
Yeah.
those.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is kind of the desperation between how you describe you and Contra's relationship and you and Destiny's relationship, because it feels like there's was a similar level of overlap, at least as far as like content and viewerships and collaboration. But it seems like for you, I guess I didn't ask, did burning the bridge with Steven, like, did that suck for you? Like, were you like kind of disappointed and sad to see like that relationship? Whatever kind of relationship you characterized as, which seemed mostly there was kind of a weird tension because you guys were always fighting, but you also always collabed together. So it was like there's some people it's I don't know if you have these friendships, but like friendships where you always fight and you also always get along.
Now,
And you like whatnot.
it wasn't really a mutual thing like that. The bridge burning with Destiny wore out its welcome like 1% of the way into the process of the bridge burning down. It was like trying to burn down the Golden Gate Bridge with like a sparkler or something like that, or like it took way the fuck to. I guess it's unfortunate that he is the way he is now in almost every sense. But like that was, he I guess he made that as evidently not something that I could feel bad about as possible, like pretty early on. The Contra thing was just the one day, though. If Contra had
Yeah.
spent like 2 years being like psychotic at me or something through their platform, then maybe I would probably feel different about that.
I think
Um,
it's because you and Steven are similar on like one really important aspect for interpersonal tension, which is
we both have
neither of you
beards.
ever back down. Yeah, and that and your beards.
Oh yeah, well, obviously in that respect, I mean, I wouldn't have liked Destiny for so long and watched his content for so long if there weren't some like character similarities there, right? Um,
Right.
yeah, that obviously
And
the
some
beard, of course.
respect as well, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's he kind of brought about the the online debate space as it exists right now, um,
Mhm.
which is remarkable. I don't know how much he's doing that now. I don't watch his content anymore. It seems like he does more like drama stuff. Like, I don't know if it's quite like what's his name? The gnome. What's his name? Um, oh, what's the
The
the guy with the pointy beard? The other
the
gnome.
gnome.
Keemstar, right. I don't know if it's the
Team.
other gnome. Right. I don't know if it's like that tier or whatever. But it seems like it's pretty drama oriented. Obviously, Contra's doing like the same thing now that she has been for years prior. And I hope she keeps it up. I've always thought she's the best video essayist of the breadtube space.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, she's brilliant.
Yeah, she's
Even
pretty
if even
cool.
yeah, it's just yeah, I've had so many people like you should do video essays, and I'm like, why would you ever do video essays when ContraPoints exists? Like it sets the bar like so beyond the pale for anyone else. It's kind of crazy.
Plus the bisexual lighting costs. They really rack up.
Yeah, seriously, that ambient lighting is
Yeah.
fucking mint. Okay, I was told previously you mentioned it once that you're a horse lover. What
Yeah.
does that mean? I know that's a meme, but I was also told to ask you about it. I have a running meme where I talk about anarcho equestrianism and how that is actually my ideal socio-political landscape that I would like to advocate for.
Trying to
Obviously, it's a joke.
trying to think what FCC rating I want to keep this stream at.
What's an
The
FCC rating? Tell me what that
Oh,
is
the
first.
the Federal Committee. Wait, is it Federal Committee for Communications? I was just making a joke about like the rating of this in terms of its
Oh
content.
yeah, I get it. 18 plus is fine. I don't really have minors, and I
Okay,
don't know if
just
you have any either.
so back when I was just a fan of Destiny, so like back in like 2018, 2017, like that around about, I made it very publicly known in his Discord that I think that horsecocks are very aesthetic, and that I wanted one to demolish sexually submissive people. This is an objectively correct thing that I believe still to this day and have never backed down on, not even for a moment. Um, but of course, I wasn't talking about all that when I started streaming. It's just other people had like screenshots of me saying this 1 to 500 times. So now it's just a known factor of the stream. And once that's known, by the way, you can't run away from it. And there's nothing more cringe than somebody for whom like something like that is known, and they're like, "Oh, well, I changed my mind. That was crazy. Whatever. Fuck that bullshit. You have to own it." And funnily enough, with confidence, nobody gives me shit about this at all. Like, seriously, I get like no shit about this. Everybody thinks it's funny, despite how out there it is.
Okay, so you unironically think that horsecock is attractive, essentially.
Yeah,
I'm
because like
understanding you.
like if you had one, like yeah, right? Like that's sort of the aesthetic appreciation of a penis is always
Because they're huge.
contextualized. Yeah, I fucking yeah, love huge dicks, obviously. Um, the aesthetic appreciation of a dick has always got to be like contextualized by like, oh wow, that looks like it would be fun to fuck someone with and or like be fucked by, right? Like that's because like that's sort of that's what people tend to do with dicks. So, following in line with that logic, since they're so fucking big, like 2 feet long or whatever, that's got to be great, right?
Well, have you ever worked with horses?
Well, I've been around horses long enough to know that they're fucking disgusting, like all barn animals. It's a purely conceptual dalliance. I'll say that much.
Okay, so not enough work. Enough work to know that they're dirty. Well,
They're fucking
they're
filthy. They're literally
horse
yeah.
cocks are very dirty. As when you own a horse that's gelded, you have to clean it regularly because a lot of their like natural cleaning product doesn't come out as it needs to on a ungelded male horse. And I can tell you, horse cock is not all it's cracked up to be. It's pretty disgusting.
If you're
It
trying
smells
to
extremely bad.
if you're trying to dissuade me, you could never breach the conceptual space in which I exist,
Okay.
which is accommodated and supported entirely by extremely high fidelity furry drawings of anthros with 6-foot penises turning bottoms into like human condoms or something.
Wait,
It's
so why not walrus cock? Because don't walruses have the largest penis for body size of any other animal?
Well, see, that's the thing. It's all about branding, right? I don't have any mental conception of what a walrus dick is like, but everyone knows. If you say like, I hooked up with some guy last night, he had a horse cock, like what that means, right? Like the walls were
Yeah.
getting reshaped.
We were
It's
talking about
branding.
horse cock since like biblical times. Isn't there like a Song of Solomon's lines, or like maybe it's a psalm about he's hung like a? I mean, it was a
It was like,
donkey,
yeah,
but
like hung
it's
like a
very much the
donkey
same idea.
with emissions like horses. Yeah, exactly. All the way back to biblical times. So clearly, even the good people of the apostles would agree that there is some kind of cultural semantic value to going like, oh yeah, getting railed by a horsecock, pretty wild
Hmm. What
in
do you think is
concept.
something in concept?
Yeah, keeping that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think when it plays out, I think that guy died or something like
that's
that. It's
the
usually not a
button that I have, the in Minecraft button that I play anytime I say anything about horsecock.
in Minecraft. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think people don't know about you that they should to understand you?
Fuck. The
What
issue
do you
is
think I'm missing?
The issue is I'm so fucking loud. It's difficult to imagine anyone watching me and not knowing every single thing going through my head at any point in time. I'm trying to think. I think, hmm, what's,
What have I missed in this conversation?
well, I
Because
don't,
I feel like I like to like, I don't know if you do this, but when I talk to people, I feel like I get like a mental image that I start painting of them. And a lot of my questions are oriented towards being like, if we're going to stick with the painting analogy, I'm like, okay, if he's wearing gloves, are they blue or brown gloves, right? So then I'll ask a question. And then based on his response, I'm like, okay, it seems like it's brown, right? And then I'll keep building and building this image of you. But I feel like my image of you is fuzzy at best, and I can't decide if that's because I'm just bad at understanding you or what precisely it is.
I think at the end of the day, a lot of my behavior is explained pretty well by the fact that I'm not particularly social and I'm extremely impulsive, you know? A lot of my day to day, it's not like very complicated. I'll spend like 12 hours in a row playing video games, and then I'll tell stream that I had a headache so I couldn't stream or something. Um, or I'll just like randomly decide to go hang out with friends of mine, or I'll ignore their messages for 3 weeks or something. There's not, I don't My behavior isn't that orchestrated. I think a lot of people look for some kind of like underlying plan. There are obvious things that I want, of course. I have my political values. Everyone wants to grow their channel, blah de blah. But beyond that, there's not like I don't think there's like an underlying degree of complexity. I try to keep the complexity on the surface, I guess is what I mean to say. I think a lot of people think that there's some kind of virtue in appearing comprehensible, but underneath that there's some like hidden turmoil that you need to be close to them to understand. And
Mm.
I don't know how well that works for people, to be honest.
It's
Um
kind of a romanticization of the mental health movement, hey? That's something
exactly.
I've noticed, right? Like you've got to be beautifully broken underneath, which is like this is something I try to like remind many people in my audience of being like, there's lots of just normal people. Like they're just normal. It's not actually all that complicated. They have like two parents, good life, normal things. They just want to be a welder and a nurse and live their life and have kids and then grandchildren and then die. And that's about it. And that's actually the standard experience.
Right, they took their normal pills.
Right.
I think that a lot of people have this kind of like internal Byronic self-conception where they want to be like the like dark inheritor, like watching the storm from the cliffside, their insides brooding as they compl but like people are complicated, sure, but I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with being, I guess straightforward and upfront about it. And I think for a lot of people that might give them the impression that there's not that much sort of going on because they're very upfront about how they feel, which sort of suggests a lack of complexity. But I think much in the same way that, it's very difficult to fully work out a social position without discussing it because the discursive medium is really good for finding contradictions in like a dialectical sense. I think the same goes for a lot of our internal struggles and mental health issues, where if you're very forthcoming about how you feel, this may project the image of a simpleton who's just sort of screaming what's, right off the top of his head at the beginning of every day. But in reality, it's meant to invite conversation. And if you can talk about those feelings, you might arrive at something that ends up being more interesting or complicated than any like internal, tumultuous system that's kept hidden from public view. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, I do. What do you think about blind spots then?
I don't know how well you could get around them, really. I mean, you can do your best to mitigate them. And that's what other people are for, right? It's easy to
Yeah.
have blind spots when you keep all that shit entirely internal because then you're the only one looking at them. But if there's some conceptualization you have that, is sort of being exposed to public inquiry, I feel like it's more likely that if there are holes in it, it'll be found. I mean, think of how many guys there are, for example, who have like this really sort of weird, kept up um, self-perception when it comes to the masculine need to provide for their family, right? True death of the salesman shit. Like they're internally tortured by their need to provide or whatever. The problem is these feelings are so universal and so well explored that like a 5-minute conversation, I feel like could completely upend some of these people. Do you ever get the feeling
Mhm.
like you could walk up to some like Midwestern suburban dad and talk to him for 3 minutes and like cause him to have an existential crisis because he's given so little thought to the things that bother him that you could just like bring up a few ideas like, hey, maybe these things aren't realistic and that's a bad expectation, da, da, da. And you could just and then they're like reeling from that. That's a blind spot, right? I mean, that's a product, I think, in that case, I guess, of not engaging in like I guess sort of cultural self-awareness when it comes to your problems. But we all have versions of that, don't we? I mean, how
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of outlining here like an existential blind spot, right? For example, like most people have an existential blind spot around death. Like we all acknowledge death happens, that it's going to happen, and yet very few of us really wrestle with the fact that we're going to die. And oftentimes, when we are forced to wrestle with that, like in a near death experience, it can be a massive life changing experience for the better or the worse because we're left to confront this existential blind spot that has always existed. But then we also have kind of what I would call like intrapersonal blind spots, right? Or for example, like a failing of our character or behavior that regularly impacts other people and it causes undesirable impacts on either we don't desire to have that impact on people or it's causing people to like leave, push away, et cetera, um, that is also hard to see. And when you confront people with these, there's typically the same thing happens. Either they have a massive crisis where they have to confront these things, or they pull down the shutters and they proceed in ignorance, essentially.
Yeah, and again, this is an unavoidable problem. It will always crop
Mhm.
up in some form. You try to mitigate it as best as you can. I really think as long as people are acting with self-awareness, I think it's okay. Um, Interpersonal stuff is messy. People are going to get hurt no matter what. You should work to minimize it, but again, inevitable to an extent. People who have different ideas about how a relationship should or shouldn't continue, stuff is going to happen. The saddest thing is when people are sort of running headlong into a wall over and over, but they don't seem to be aware of why they're doing it. Like they're not self-aware enough to understand why they keep like running into this issue. And that I think
Mhm.
is the really sad thing. It's part of like the truth value, right? As long as everyone has all the pieces, they're aware of everything, they have the knowledge necessary, they can make better decisions. So when people act in ignorance of themselves, they can, yeah, some people die like that. They live their whole lives that way.
Most people do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess everyone does on something. Nobody's fully
Mhm.
self-aware. Some more than others, I guess.
What was a time where you experienced a blind spot and then corrected it? Like I wouldn't say these happen often. Have you ever had one of these experiences?
Yeah, sure. Um, I'm probably pretty afraid of commitment, but like I guess now in a more realized way, whereas before it was in a very unrealized way. When I was
Mhm.
younger, like in my early 20s, and obviously the bitches are always throwing themselves at you as one does. Please marry me, please marry blah blah. Obviously what you can't even hear yourself think. And at the time I was thinking to myself, oh, I can't commit to some kind of serious relationship with these people because because of this specific thing, you know? But over time and through experience, I realized that it wasn't any specific thing. I was just afraid of commitment. This is a very common problem, I think, especially for men who all have
Mm.
fantasies of being rock stars, before settling down. Um, and I don't necessarily think I've gotten rid of those feelings, but I'm now not dishonest to myself or to other people when I act on them, Like I think and it's
Mm.
much easier that way. You can just think like, "Well, why do I feel trepidatious here?" Oh, of course, I'm just, kind of averse to commitment. That's much better than saying, "Oh, well, it's this specific thing they do, but if they fix that, then no, no, no. That's not good, I think. You should know."
So you realized that you had a fear of commitment. Did you have like a fantasy of being a rock star? Did you figure out why you were afraid of being committed? Or you just because I'm afraid of commitment is one thing. A lot of people look for the etiology as well. Did you look for that etiology?
Um I think a lot of it is just that people tend to be pretty intolerable given a long enough time. How many friends have all the people watching this right now had that have lasted more than 5 or 10 years? Maybe a couple, but as a percentage of the whole, probably a pretty small two or maybe even one digit percentage. It's a difficult, a bet to make, the marriage, I think, or any kind of like committed relationship. And
Mhm.
other people's feelings towards you are very difficult to manage too. This is why my great fear if I'm hanging out with somebody or casually dating or something like that, right? The great fear for me is not that I will fall in love with them. The great fear for me is the opposite, because then there's an entirely new set of expectations that have been established. Obviously, this is just part of life. Mutual expectations are a part of friendships too, not just relationships.
Mhm.
But, obviously it's a little more serious. And that can be difficult to manage. It's one of the reasons why some people, including myself, for example, don't really want to have children, like in practice, even if in concept I would love to have kids, Because in practice, I knew if I had children, I would just think one day I would much rather play video games, but I can't because I have kids to take care of. And then I would be like sort of passively irritated about it the whole day, which is a horrible thing for a parent to be. No
Mm.
kid should feel like they're being a burden just through existing. So in recognizing I don't have the disposition for certain behaviors, or lifestyles, at least not at the moment, the same might be the case with commitment. But I'm happy to know
Mm.
that rather than to think it's some like one specific thing, you know?
Yeah, when you're saying disposition, like I don't have a disposition for this. It makes it sound like you would view disposition as immutable, but then you've also talked about change. So I imagine that you don't believe disposition to be wholly immutable. What degree do you feel like your personality, as it is right now, is an immutable, likely unchangeable thing? And to what degree do you think, like, say for example, you're like, you know what, I would like to work to be the person who could just enjoy children. Do you think that that's something you could cultivate in yourself, or do you think you only have so much wiggle room from whatever set point, whether that's biological or whatever forms that set point? How much is is wiggleable?
Girl, I'm pretty stubborn, but I think it's all changeable, in concept. I think everything about everyone potentially is changeable in concept. I don't know how likely it is that the right things will change fast enough. It's something that I would like to change, of course. I think it's just sort of a reflection of their biases at the moment and kind of like a fear of how well they'd be able to say any future needs they might have if they did change like that. Who knows how well you will be able to satisfy the person you might be in the future, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of this idea. It's something I've wrestled with. Of when we talk about change, it feels like, especially in psychology, for example, we kind of laud change. Like change is good. When sometimes people don't change for the better, they change for the different, and that's it. Like they've just changed. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just different now.
And you have to do the whole introspection self-discovery thing again, right? Which,
Yeah.
that takes a lot of time. That's exhausting. It's a lot of work. But obviously, to the process being maybe change itself is not always good, but being able to change, I think, is always good. So you should always have cultivated the mechanisms that you could use to make yourself a different person and understand who that person is.
Mhm. Do you expect your channel to change or pivot at any point in the future, as far as content or your goals or anything like that?
The channel's always been a pretty just direct projection of my interests at the moment, but my interests in this respect have remained pretty consistent. I like debates, I like politics and political analysis, I like media analysis whenever I can convince my audience to listen to it. Um, I don't think that's going to change in any meaningful sense. In terms of the style of its presentation, the most direct change, I think, was after January 6th, which was the switch from when I went to, fascism is a bad ideology we must avoid, and to the other currently held position, which is that fascism is currently hurtling towards us, we must dodge. Um, and that sort of reframed some of the language that I use. But apart from that, I think there's been a great deal of consistency.
Okay. And so if I'm going back to the very beginning, 'cause I love making big round circles in all my interviews. Which one was it? It had a phone number on it. This one. You said basically your goal for people walking away is to never essentialize. Do you think that that goal has remained kind of the main purpose of your content?
Yeah, I think that's the most recurring theme by far. Yeah, I do. Um, Fascism, of course, relies on essentialization to function. You literally cannot be a fascist who engages in, a deconstructive sociological analysis which does not essentialize. It's not. It's essential. Um, and I think that most negative ideologies also are kind of rooted there. The big crime is presumption, isn't it? Right? When you think of the big isms, right? Racism, sexism, homophobism. If you think of like the big ills socially, a lot of them come down to presumptiveness. A person is a part of X group, so they must be like this. That's the common
Mm.
thread. I think that sociology exists in large part to pull away at that thread, to say, well, actually, things are unbelievably complicated. And if you thought about it for a moment, you might realize that there's not some underpinned fundamental, difference here, but rather just a collection of circumstantial ones that if you were subject to, you would be, you'd be on the other side, right? We see this all the time when it comes to like, debates with trans people, Are trans women women? Well, you can go down the biology side, you can go down the social side, but no matter which side you go down, one thing must be immediately recognized, and it's that women are lots of things, you know? Especially when they start talking about socialization, right? Well, they say, well,
Hmm.
trans women were socialized male or whatever that means, and then it's like, well, women are like this. Women are like anything. Women can have any upbringing. I didn't realize that was like a precursor. But people have this idea of what it means. Why do women wear dresses? Why do men wear suits? Some people, I have had people give me biological answers to this. Sincerely, what
Hmm.
kind of brain damage must one have to think, well, there must be some fundamental bioessentialist explanation for why women wear dresses and men wear suits?
Hmm.
Unbelievable. And this is the root of the problem. You see this over and over.
Mm. So, how do you then feel about things like quantitative data and normalizing? So, like major norms claimed, which is, to be honest, a large basis of psychology, for example, is creating aggregate quantitative data to establish certain norms and principles, essentially saying like this seems to be broadly baseline, which is how we get diagnostics, right? When people differ too far along the pendulum, then that might be, especially when that's paired with dysfunction, potentially a diagnostic issue that requires treatment to get them more towards the norm. um, I'm curious what you think about that type of data and research.
It's important, but it can't be engaged in blindly. Michel Foucault wrote on medicalization of the mind, how
Hmm.
attributes that used to be just an accepted eccentricity, as scientists in their desire to measure every bit of our skull and everything inside of it, lock down human behavior into distinct quantitative attributes and tests and measurements that have not so much given us a better understanding of our minds as limited it by sort of relegating everything to a purely quantitative conceptual space. So an
Okay.
example would be autism, for example, right? We say autism
Mhm.
spectrum. All being autistic is being more or less of some things that every human has some of. When we talk about aversion towards certain social norms or towards ambiguity, being blunt, having special interests, aversion towards certain sensations, all humans have these traits. They just have them in different amounts. Where we draw the
Mhm.
line for when a person becomes autistic is an entirely arbitrary line. It's a socially ascribed line. A different society might, draw it in a different place. And we run the risk sometimes of the normative bias. Like I'm reminded of that paper, which I'm sure you've seen, where they were doing tests on autistic and allistics people's tendency to act in line with their own morals. And the conclusion of the study, after finding autistic people were more likely to act ethically, was that autistic people are too preoccupied with ethical behavior. They framed it negatively because the norm was assumed to be the good. The better behavior from the autistic people was framed as over obsession. And that's what I mean when I say it must be done cautiously, because that normative
Mhm.
bias creeps into all forms of analysis, no matter how careful you are.
Right, exactly. It's why I'm sure you're aware of like meta science, which is the science that studies scientific processes itself,
Hmm?
which is a super, super cool field and super hopeful. Which I probably won't talk with you about, like, because the autism conversation is actually a really interesting one because this is the medicalization of mental health is a really interesting conversation, which I won't branch into too much because it totally will derail us from the purpose of the humanizing. But it's just interesting that you bring it up because there's a large movement of like clinical psychologists who are pushing against the medicalization, because they're while like all these things seem to descend and distill down from the brain, the problem with like a medicalized view of these things is that like there's a massive difference. There is a qualitative shift that occurs, for example, in a body when it is normal versus when cancer develops, right? There's a qualitative shift in the cells, in the way that they express, and it's measurable, it's viewable. Whereas when we're talking about something like depression, there isn't a qualitative shift that typically happens. We were trying to prove it through serotonin. Turns out, as probably we should have always known, the serotonin theory was kind of a bust, right? And so, yeah, it's a really interesting conversation, and it's you point to this like greater issue that I always, as somebody who's like a pretty staunch like empirical person, which is this tension. I believe, I hope I wrote it down. It was a good line that you said. Um, it's this tension that we hold between essentially like we don't want to essentialize, but also normative claims have value, right? And like if 60% of a group, if 60% of the population that have this combining group do these certain things, I mean, this is what predictive research is, right? Like when you have a number of aggregate types of symptoms and behaviors and expressions, we can predict certain kind of outcomes. This is what forensic recidivist research is taking a bunch of random things, collecting them together and saying these behaviors all predict a later behavior occurring, which is essentially to some extent essentializing and norm creating normatives to understand future things, which is what a lot of science is. But at the same time, there can be problems with that,
Of
especially for
course.
the outliers.
The big problem is category projection as well. A
Right.
category that is used to assume another category. So like for example, you have sickle cell anemia with some West Africans, right? The reason they have that, it's just a purely geological response to the presence of the malaria and the
Oh
mosquitoes. Yes,
yeah.
I mean it's
Yeah.
it's totally environmental, as has happened by many of the people who were taken from West Africa and brought over to the United States. Those genetic traits have mostly dissipated, you know? But in the minds of
Mhm.
many people, the sickle cell anemia thing is this essential component of what it is to be West African. But you have people here in the United States who are very culturally West African in the sense that they, obviously because of the whole slavery thing, it's they rediscover their cultural identity and they take pride. So, it's a whole thing. But and yet no sickle cell anemia, or at the very least, very lessened dispositions of it in their gene structure. So
Mhm.
the category states only the category. Sorry, geographical, not geological. Um, the category assumes only the category. But what you see often with, like, say, ethno-nationalists, right, is every category that they use to mean white is what they're referring to, like, these really abstract and often not even like accurate things, like when
Mhm.
they talk about white values, for example. What the fuck does that mean? What on earth does that mean? And then they end up pointing towards things that are like believed by some people but not others, and it's the category ascription thing. Once you break every empirical category down exclusively to its empirics while understanding what led to those empirics, you break the essentialization, because nothing can survive that level of analysis while remaining essentialized. You're de-essentializing it to the furthest point, which you have to,
Mhm.
for some of these convos.
How much do you think your training in sociology has influenced the way that you analyze and view the world?
Probably a whole lot. I mean, obviously a whole lot. I care about it a lot. I don't know how much I did for the book learning in university, because I didn't pay that much attention in class, but there were some underlying themes of the analysis we were encouraged to engage in that I'm just constantly doing on the channel. So obviously it meant a lot to me.
Because one thing I notice, I've taken only a couple of sociology courses. One thing I notice is their understanding of like they kind of create theory constructions and like speculations about the world based on different lenses, right? So there's like different dominant theorists that you can utilize to interpret major sociological events. Is there like a dominant theorist or anyone that you typically ascribe to or try to utilize to understand the world?
Well, the one I use the most is probably Marx. It's Marx or Foucault whenever he comes up. I mean, Chomsky comes up a lot when it comes to like manufacturing consent, which it feels like 30% of the stuff I talk about on stream these days. Um, and who is the other one? Durkheim comes up when I talk about the nature of crime and religion, pretty frequently. And who Oh, there was another one I had in mind. Did I say Wittgenstein? Well, that's linguistics, not necessarily sociology, but also they're so similar. There are so many overlaps. I
Mhm.
think there are many valid theories to keep coming back to. I mean, Marx obviously comes up the most often.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Um, I guess my question for you would be what have I not asked you that I should have?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm very bad at this, the what has not been talked about thing, because everything that I thought to talk about, I already did. Um, I'm trying to think of any super prominent left drama. Oh, I guess I talked about that, didn't I? I don't know. It's been 3 hours. I feel like we've been pretty
Mhm.
thorough. It's been
Mhm.
a good conversation. I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk about this stuff. I uh I do deeply care about these subjects, not just the stuff that I do on my channel, but also the stuff that you brought up with regards to values analysis and internal blind spots and the like. I often feel
Mm,
that I'm often accused of ableism for this, which it is. I'm often of the opinion that like very often political disagreements come down to kind of like a mental health issue. I
mm,
really do think that a lot of political beliefs are essentially just a kind of pathologized, weaponized mental illness that causes essentially the same characteristics, you know? For example, to be a good Nazi, you know, to be a like an ideologically consistent Nazi, you have to at least to some extent be an anti-empiricist. There were some things they believed back then, especially, you know, back in their heyday, that just did not conform with reality and they knew it, you know? Um,
mm.
and to whether or not somebody would call that, you know, evident of some kind of mental abnormality, obviously at the Nuremberg trials, you know, they did psych tests on all these people and found they were actually quite mentally normal. So maybe the better statement would be that there are some political beliefs that are so divergent from reality that they can manifest in ways that are apparently similar to some kind of mental issue. But then again, we do use Twitter, and I'm pretty sure most of the people there are legitimately mentally ill. So maybe this, you know, we're getting a double overlap, perhaps.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I've been in this space, I used to do addictions counseling. I'm a licensed addictions counselor as well. And it feels like I have run up against more extreme forms of mental illness than I was expecting transferring. Like when you work at a women's shelter for addiction, you expect there to be lots of mental illness, right? When you work at a lockup facility that has like forensic people detoxing, forensic teens, I expect there to be large amounts of mental illness. Um, I suppose probably it's like the bad normie in me that I didn't quite expect it when I moved into the more online sphere, where I expected it to be more Gen Pop. And realizing either it is Gen Pop and Gen Pop is way more unwell than I thought, or there's a selection bias of probably to some extent, if you're socially rejected in your major local area, there's a higher chance that there is like some mental illness going on. That's probably why you're being rejected because our society is not very sympathetic to what I would say is like invisible disability or invisible issues.
Yeah.
Mental illness is that. Um, and a lot of them probably find their people online because they have a bigger group to pick from.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, obviously, some of the most insufferable people online are really just sort of acting out whatever, like petty power they can amass to compensate for the horrible shit that's going on in their day-to-day life, right? You know, I'm reminded
Mhm.
of any interaction with left Twitter, right? These people are very traumatized, but hopefully we'll fix this one day.
I'm curious about that, about your experience. Like, would you say then? I read it, so I'll tell you something. I read a study, and obviously we have to take this with a huge grain of salt because it's a study looking at political compass response. However, there's an element where, like, when we say liberal versus conservative, most people like broadly kind of understand what that means, even though obviously at deeper layers, who the fuck knows what those things mean? And I saw that there was a poll done. I'm trying to remember which company did it. They do it was a United States like kind of census. It's not like the Bureau of Census and
I think I
Statistics.
know what you're referring to. I think Paul Joseph Watson did a video on this, where it's the likelihood of a person claiming they're mentally ill broken down into very left, moderately left, centrist, and so for the conservatives.
It's not that one, but you
It's
should tell
not?
me about that
Okay,
because
okay,
I'm
then never
curious.
mind.
No. Okay, well, I'm gonna write it down because I want to come back to you about that because I'm curious. But this one basically was looking at whether people identified as being liberal, very liberal, which was identified typically as ideal having like communist or socialist type of beliefs, conservative, and then very conservative, which was again kind of more that alt right kind of authoritarian lean. And so problems with the methodology necessarily aside, what they found is that Gen Z was increasingly and faster than any generation before moving away from being because typically young people are liberal and left leaning in general, and then as they get older they become conservative for multiple reasons, both personality potentially shifting over time and also overton window shifting to the left over time. And what they've been finding is that Gen Z is becoming not liberal at a faster rate than any previous generation. And they're specifically going, there's a massive number of them actually becoming moderates. And then some of them are also becoming conservatives, which was really, really interesting. Um, and the most I can think of it is I'm a pretty progressive person and I can't stand most lefties because I just find them like unbearable people to kind of be around. Like they're often just like very unpleasant humans. I'm not sure about your experience. So maybe my bias is coming into that, but um, have you basically been somewhat ostracized from like the leftist pool?
Well, they hate me because I'm so sufferable, of course. Yeah, I'm somewhat ostracized, at least from the breadtube space. I can't complain too much because my audience is large enough that I've basically formed my own community, you know? Um, I'm a known variable, and therefore, I kind of create my own space to an extent. I'm not surprised by the study that you cited, the results that it
Mhm.
found. It makes sense to me because while every generation for a long time has passively been more progressive than the last, this is the first time that the young people have gotten directly involved in the culture war, like right off the bat, you know.
Yeah.
And young people are generally quite cruel and quite self-interested, I think. And I think
Yep.
that there are stronger biases that will pull them towards moderate or reactionary politics than towards the opposite. I know because this happened to me. When I was young, I found leftists largely insufferable. They did not care for my sense of humor. I thought they were sort of namby-pamby pussies who were constantly trying to project their social standards for acceptable humor onto everyone else.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I was completely correct. But of course, because I was younger, that biased my political opinions, and it made me kind of like right libertarian for a little while. I think it will bounce back. I think that what we're seeing right now is like the pettiest expression of the culture war,
Mm.
duking it out on like the on the lowest level, but that the overall trend will maintain a leftward bend.
Okay. Interesting. Um, I guess one final question. You said you were interested in this blind spot stuff. Do you sometimes worry? Because we've talked about like the fortress arc and how you've burnt a lot of bridges, and then we kind of made the joke, and that makes you an island now. And I get that obviously that's not maybe the perfect analogy. Do you worry though that as you've kind of like created your own community, as you said, you're not really part of leftist tube, you're not really part of any, you kind of created your own niche. Are you worried that essentially like you will run into the issue where blind spots don't get pointed out for yourself, that you become blind to certain like corrections that you might need?
No, actually, I think the opposite is the case because I think that it's easiest to avoid blind spots when you're sort of protected by the herd. Because that's what I see in all the other left channels that I have these issues with, where they will do or say dumb shit in line with the dumb shit that's taking place, um, broadly in the community, and they don't call
Mhm.
it out in each other, and it just sort of persists, and it gets magnified, in fact. I think that the character traits I hold that have ostracized me from those communities are also the character traits that sort of keep me away from that more groupthinky behavior. I'm obviously not very susceptible to groupthink, given my you know, the propensity to
Disagreeable
just
nature?
yeah, it's just that's just not. I have problems. That's not one of my problems. That's not one of the things that I think I deal with that much. I argue with the left nonstop. Um, I think my community is going to do a good job continuing to hold me to account. And I don't think I'm that prideful when it comes to like the idea that I can never be wrong. I think I
Mhm.
own up to my limitations pretty often. I'll be wrong from time to time, but I think that as long as you go into it with a good attitude, you can reliably steer in the generally good direction. It does help that like the rest of the politics space right now, broadly, in the world, like I as the captain of my own ship might not have like the best heading always, but there are people
Mhm.
like lighting fires on their own ships and driving, like sort of steering them directly into shipwrecks and lighting the gunpowder. I feel like, for comparison's sake, I do an okay job.
Okay, that's fair. That's basically everything I have. I can't think of anything else. Do you have like a 5-year plan? And I guess, are you open to me taking some questions from potentially the community? I'd probably just take super chats and I'm going to vet them. I'm not just going to take any super chat question because
God, sure.
I don't trust the audience to
I'm
ask
a-okay with
appropriate
that.
questions.
It'll have to be a smidge on the quick side, though.
Mhm.
It's been a protracted convo. But no, go right ahead. As for 5-year plan, I guess I just need to find new audiences to reach out into. Everyone in the online left or debate space knows who I am. Nobody does not.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of reaching new communities, Right now, like there are so many huge communities out there. You can like see TikTokers who will scream like fifth grade level political analysis into their cameras for 30 seconds and get like 8 million views on the video. Like there's so much out there,
Yeah.
So I'll do my best to, attract the attention of as many people as I can. We'll see how it goes.
Okay. I'm just looking through super chats now. I'll see if there's any questions that come up. Otherwise, I'll just let you go. So you guys have like 2 minutes. If you want to ask a question to Vaush, you can super chat it in. The reason I'm picking super chats is there's almost 1,000 of you here, and so I can't vet the chat by itself. But thanks for being here.
Can't even say slurs off of the Twitch chat. Can you believe it?
I
All the
know.
good questions have those.
Da, 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 da. Just a bunch of people just excited that you're here.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Got a couple of raids. Thanks for the raids.
It's been a real fun conversation.
Wow. I got like a bunch of raids today. Crazy. They all knew you were coming. A lot of people were very excited to have you.
Oh, thank you. The second front of the Russian invasion has opened up. They've taken to your chat now. This is all the Kremlin can afford now.
just spam and messaging here. There's a bunch of people in my community as well from Vaush. Do you have any questions for me? I guess if there's no questions in the community.
Yeah. I guess who do you want to talk to next if you got a plan? Or you probably got a couple of people you're vying for.
Yeah, for the humanizing?
Yeah.
I really want to do Trainwrecks. I think he's probably got a very interesting life story. He's also very controversial. I have a couple of limits of people that I won't do for the humanizing at this point, which is mainly I'm not going to do people that I think I can't trust at all, to be honest, specifically if they're going to intentionally lie about their life story for like political gain.
Sam Hyde. Let's go.
I would love to do Sam Hyde. I don't know if I could catch him, but yeah, there's
I don't think I could he's a very smart guy, you know.
He is smart.
Yeah. Did you see the iDubbbz thing on him where he got
Yeah. I've been slowly getting introduced to the online world. I was a normie before I started streaming. I started streaming 9 months ago, and before then I was like a true blue normie. And almost like I thought I was a gamer girl because I like played Ark sometimes, like to like relax, or like RimWorld.
Oh fuck! Oh well, hey, RimWorld's great. So that definitely kicks for something. You can't be a full normie while playing RimWorld. Okay, that game demands stuff of you.
That's true, especially once you get the prisoner and you can start like harvesting organs and selling them on the black market.
I try to play that game morally every time. I'm like,
do you?
My self-imposed limitations, like, we will adhere to the constitutional rights of the republic. You know?
Yeah, I always start being like, I'm gonna be a hotel, and I'm just gonna like, take care of random people, and then I'm like, remove the traveler's door, harvest their organs, make them prisoners, make them do all of my work. Yeah.
Start digging the mass grave, get it out, get the factory line working up. Fuck, you interviewing Trainwrecks would be very, very fun. I haven't seen anything from Trainwrecks in a while. He is extremely monkey-pilled, which I think, I don't even know how to answer some of these questions. I don't even think he's dumb. I just think he's a monkey. I don't even know. Yeah. It's a wacky guy.
Yeah, but I suspect he's got a very intense life, probably. I'm not sure. I've considered doing Myron from Fresh and Fit. If he would come on, I think that would be a really interesting one.
Which one is that?
That's the balding one. A tall one.
I really want to fucking make fun of these Fresh and Fit guys to their face someday. They probably don't respect COVID rules, so maybe not to their face. Maybe I'll be like outside the window they have at the back of their studio, and I'll be like shouting in. I'll have my face pressed against the glass.
I met them. I don't know if I was on their podcast a couple weeks ago.
No, I think I heard that. Or did you email me that? I think I knew that. How'd it go?
Brown leather jacket girl. Really well. Really, really well. I think. Yeah, I offered a pushback where I think it was warranted. I think I like pulled a lot of people. We got them to basically admit that their advice was only really useful for like 200 of their 21,000 viewers, which was based. So yeah.
I need to go over there and I need to make everything much worse by giving them all the advice that I've distilled from like the left Twitter trans lesbian T for T communities. Unlike just introduce them to a bunch of like TTTT terminology or whatever, and like how to maximize and just fucking ruin everything and make everything worse. That'd be really. I think just fun.
Let them know that you're bi and then watch their reaction.
I love talking to these misogynist pickup artist dudes. and acting like a massive homosexual. It's very, very fun. Um, because you can get along with them. You can agree to all the sexist shit they say and then talk about the guys that you fucked. You know what I mean? And it
Yeah.
because and then they're like, no, we mean girl. It's like a whole, it's like a reframing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the conversation. I'm going to go cover the topic only slightly more important than my psychosis, which is the war in Ukraine.
Yes, important one. Thank you so much for stopping in. I super appreciate it, and maybe I'll hit you up for a future conversation.
Absolutely. You have a good one.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye for now.
That was fun. Also, credit where credit's due. I didn't think it'd be that in depth, but it sure as shit was. Don't normally get convos that run that deep into my psyche. Yeah, that's good. It's good fun. Yeah, do you have any fucking idea how angry the left community would be if I went on there and started like trying to explain to the Fresh and Fit guys what like Giga Han pilled means? Or like AGP or what? I feel like holy shit. I feel like I would get anthrax in my. I don't know what that means. It's like the terminally online edgy trans girl 4chan like terminology. It's like the subsection of trans girls who like are walking around outside and they see a cis woman who has like a slightly taller than average forehead, and in the trans girl's head she's like, this girl's trans. I just clocked her. She's gonna die alone. Look at how big her hands are. And she's like looking at a 32-year-old cisgender married woman who's happy. You know, that's the the, that's the yeah, that's the community I'm talking about. So the GCs of trans people. Listen, it's a whole thing. I can't. People already accuse me of being an egg, and the more I reveal I know about TTTT terminology, the easier they get to make that accusation of me. Oh, see, Demon Mama knows. Please don't do that, Yarsi. Yeah, our Demon Mama, are you sure you don't want to like not me going on the Joe Rogan Experience just to explain like trans Twitter dating culture to him so that 10 million of the most like insufferable dude bros in America can watch, and like this information can be telephoned down to all like American. Holy shit. That'd be like a war crime. Oh my god. Just broadcast brain damage. Yeah, exactly. Just radiate concussion tier. Yeah, psychic wave. Yeah. Tell them about the gigapassoids. Yeah.